All right. Welcome to episode 26 of the Nameless Metal Podcast. This is James again. It's been a long time. I think over 6 months, probably even more. But on this episode, I've got my good friend again, Ryan. He joined me for the epic dissection episode we did, which was February last year. One of my favorite episodes that I ever did. And just, yeah, we nailed it, I thought, without, getting a big head over it. But yeah, that was a great episode. So when we were talking about Immortal, obviously we had to join forces again, unholy forces of evil, and yeah, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of those little interjections, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yep, got Ryan joining me for this episode. We're just going to go through the Immortal discography. Obviously, it won't be on the same under the microscope as much as we did with dissection, for instance, where we just absolutely went through with like every little riff and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it'll just be more of a general chat about the album itself. We'll only be sticking with the full length, so no live albums, EPs, or demo stuff. And yeah, we'll just be starting off at the beginning. But yeah, Ryan, you happy to be here?
Very happy to be here, Jim.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me on the podcast again, mate. I've got great memories of our dissection one, and I go back and revisit it fairly frequently, actually. And yeah, when we were approaching the idea of doing Immortal, I thought, wow, if we go through that with the fine-tooth comb like we did last time, we could be here for days.
Ages.
Really. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, looking forward to it. The important band for both of us individually and as mates as well,
Absolutely.
something we connected with over many years ago. So it's about time that we sort of paid tribute and did it the honor that it deserves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's another, for those out there, it's another band that's very close to both of us. A band of me personally, I sort of grew with them when they were and you probably did as well, but during that really underground period, and then watching them sort of move into a more, I wouldn't say commercial or whatever, but definitely gaining in popularity. So it's going to be interesting to go through go through all those albums and talk about those periods and stuff. And there'll be some funny shit in there as well, like Abbott not being able to be reached by that journalist from Metal Maniacs. Kept on getting his mum on the phone or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Glorious rock star lifestyle.
We might even be able to talk about your meeting with Demonaz.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots we can talk about, and that's one of the fun parts I find whenever we at least get talking about Immortal. There's so much character about the band that it becomes more than just the music as well, and you can't say that about every band. So they're kind of larger, or they were, and larger than life in lots of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's and I was thinking about it today at work as I was just walking around and stuff, and I was thinking there's been quite a lot of drama as well. You've had legal stuff with Abbott, Demonaz, and then you've had Hog, Demonaz, and then just all that sort of drama. So yeah, it's been a very eventful career.
Yeah, they're a band that's had I feel like really distinct chapters and eras that are really defined by the ending and beginning of something new.
Yeah,
whether it's musically or lineup changes or legal dramas and all that sort of thing. I guess like with any band that lives in some incarnation, as long as they have, going back to the late 80s, all the best bands, regardless of genre, have gone through those tumultuous periods of time with, eventually the human ego kicks in and legalities and all those kinds of conflict come in, and it's probably just part and parcel. If there's bands out there that have lasted that long without any of that, then they're onto something. They've got the miracle cure, I reckon.
Yeah, unless you're like a massive band who's touring and you can absolutely separate and then just get on the stage and do your job. In these smaller underground bands, that you're more close knit, and
that's right.
But we will get to all that drama at some point though. But
Sure we will. Yeah.
to start off with, I'll just do the quick Metal Archives little thing about where they were formed and all that stuff. The lyrical themes on Metal Archives are quite funny. I'll do that after I say where they were formed. So yeah, Immortal formed in 1991, Bergen, Vestland, Norway. Must be, is that like a county or something? Must be.
I think it sounds like it refers to it being in the west of the country, okay. Probably. Yeah, I would say. But any Norwegians out there can can quickly correct me on that.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Lyrical themes, and straight off the bat, grimness. That's a lyrical theme.
That's a lyrical theme.
Yeah, we got lyrical themes: grimness, winter, war, winter demons, Blashik, dark fantasy, and mysticism.
I like how they distinguish between winter and winter demons.
It's just
yeah,
crazy. But yeah, I had a good laugh at grimness as the first one.
Grimness, well, appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously formed by Abath and Demonaz. Prior to this, they had Abath had Old Funeral, which had some other members, of course, that we may know and probably won't mention. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'll have to.
That shouldn't be mentioned.
The band who should not be named.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Demonaz had Amputation, a death metal project. So
yeah. Are you going to have a stab at pronouncing their real names outside their?
I'm pretty sure is it Demonaz Harold Nivdahl?
Sounds pretty good to me. Yeah,
we'll go with that.
Harold.
And then we got Olvar Chemo for Abath.
Yeah.
And early on, I'm pretty sure it was there was a guy called Padden getting around. He was drumming, and I think he was the drummer in Old Funeral. I also remember hearing, or even on here, it says that Jorn from Hades, the other Bergen epic.
Tungsberg.
Yeah. He was like an early member, or part of it. So like prior to Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism, and then obviously what's his name? Armageddon comes in with his fantastic.
Yeah.
He had what sort of glasses would you? They're like the Napoleon.
Aviators.
Are they aviators?
I think so. Yeah. Big sunglasses.
Big sunglasses, and he had a very cool curly sort of. He just looked completely different to the other guys. Not only because he wasn't wearing corpse paint, he just looked like a rocker.
Yeah, like a 1980s German thrasher or something with the poodle mullet.
the boys are rocked up in the corpse paint. He's like, nah, not doing that.
I'm not doing that. No, that's not
doing that.
Yeah, shout out to Armageddon if you're watching.
Very solid drummer, and he done great work on the I album as well.
That's right, he was on that. Yeah,
he was. Yeah,
we might throw a mention in there about that album, I reckon, at some point.
It's a really good album. I really rate it. Or at the time I thought it sort of just fill that gap, didn't it, between Sons of Northern Darkness and then going into All Shall Fall.
Absolutely.
So what I might do now is throw over to you, and you can give me your first experiences of Immortal, how you came across them, and how it was to hear them.
Yeah, well, as with most of my encounters with extreme bands, they always came through friends while still at school. I know a good mate of ours who I've grown up with and have remained friends with for decades now. I'm sure he was the one that owned Battles in the North. Yeah. And I guess around this time, I think up until that point in time, I'd probably been familiar with Dark Throne, some Australian black metal, Bestial Warlust, and bands like that. And I was just sort of starting to, want more and more of these bands to be fed to me. And usually what would happen would be I'd see exchanges of albums between him and another one of our friends. And I'd be sort of like peering over their shoulder going, fuck, what's that? I'll borrow that. Like, can I borrow that when you're done with it and that sort of thing. And the thing I just remember is obviously the cover with the two of them just standing or squatting in the snow with their instruments, and corpse paint like I hadn't seen before. Like it didn't, to me, it didn't look so much evil or anything. It's just really distinct. Yeah, like it identified them as being something different. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the song that I remember hearing first, and I can't exactly tell you why, but was it's escaped me. It's escaped me. I'll come back to it anyway.
It's not the hit from that album. It's not Blashik Mighty Raven Dark.
No. At the Stormy Gates of Mist.
Oh, nice. Great song.
And I just remember going, fuck, I've never heard anything this fast in my life. Well, I think that was what our two mates were sort of saying, like, this is the fastest song that anyone's ever made. I'm like, oh, really? Like, I need to hear that. And yeah, sure enough, at that point in time, at least, I'd never heard speed like that in music. No. Just this, like, we'll get to talking about the production, like the performances on that album when we get to it, but like the chaos of the drums, it was so fast. It was just beyond, it was on overdrive chaos. Like someone who'd kind of tipped over the edge of their limit of what they could control, but was still going for it anyway. And the same with the guitar riffing as well. It was just
fully chaos, extreme. But never fell apart. It never fell apart, but it felt like it was always going to fall apart.
It was on the edge of falling apart, but which is that's the definition of extreme as far as I'm concerned. So I was pretty drawn in by that whole concept of that just flat out speed, which for that album in general is probably characterized by that for me, with moments of epic kind of stuff in there. But yeah, that Battles in the North was my starting point.
Yep.
And I think I quickly, not long after that, once I was really on board with Immortal, I'm like, yeah, this is well, actually what I should mention was the two film clips that were associated with that album. I think
classic film clips.
Classic. And not long after that, I think one of our mates had it was a VHS from memory.
It was,
yeah.
Can't remember the title, but it was the cover was pretty much similar as the album.
It was,
but slightly different. It was something Blashik, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah, something. Yeah. But I just remember, not too long after hearing the album, that VHS was there as and available for me to see, and it just painted this picture of this unique kind of band, and at that stage, I didn't know every single black metal band out there, and I hadn't really built my knowledge of what it was all about. But to me, they just look like beings that had come from somewhere else. Like it wasn't even relatable. It was like they were literally like these people that were, or whatever you want to call them, that had come from some other place in the universe and then just landed on a mountaintop and started
playing chaotic, aggressive
doing
music.
What they do. Yeah. So hard not to be enthralled by as a young man. I think like that level of adrenaline and extremeness, and just I think the thing that stuck out to me most was that how genuine it was. Like it didn't seem cheesy. Like it was like a genuine expression of something that probably most people hadn't really encountered up until that band came on the scene and got that notoriety.
And I think the like if you take Battles in the North, I think from the outside, the people who looked at that album cover back then, they saw it as a joke without knowing the seriousness of the music. And it sort of, I mean, I never got the joke vibe with it. Like of course I thought it was very, in hindsight, and you look at how Abbott became later, it was just more like rock and roll to me. It was just out there and outlandish, like they would just do it. And I mean, they brought in the just having them on the album cover as well, didn't they? That wasn't, or maybe Dark Throne done it on
Dark Throne,
Blazing Northern Sky. Zephyrus was on it.
Well, that's where
they brought it in. But Dark Throne also had it on Under a Funeral Moon and Transylvanian Hunger in a way too, didn't they?
And
probably others, But for me, Immortal was, I don't think there's many bands, especially from that era, perhaps enslaved, that you could, I don't want to use the term concept band, but essentially they've run with a concept and never gone away from it, you know. And so they've kind of, the interviews that I've read with them over the years, they fully stand behind this concept that they've built. Like, in many ways it's fantasy, but it's also strongly based in Northern mythology and all of that sort of stuff as well. So it's kind of, it's true to them in terms of where they are, you know, where they are in the world. And just super unique, and it set them apart from like all the other Norwegian black metal bands. You know, they were part of that second wave of black metal. Like, you know, if you want to create a top four, you could not leave Immortal out of it, I don't think, from the Norwegian black metal scene. But in saying that, as with all the bands probably from that scene, they were different to me. They seemed, maybe the fact they were from Bergen and they weren't like strictly in that, even though they had obviously had contact with Euronymous and then Oslo scene, they seemed to me like literally to be out on that western coast of Norway and sort of isolated and just left to their own devices. Yeah, left to their own devices. And
serious. They were deadly serious about what they were doing. They were,
yeah.
That's what I got from them back then. They were dedicated and serious about, regardless of what people thought of what they were doing, they were 100% into what they were doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
you know, that came through, especially later on through Abatha's, you know, the front man that he was and is, in attitude of not giving a fuck. Like,
yeah,
you know, just, yeah, I think they just carved out their own path that was different from others, and still stands up and is exactly, you know, it's credible and authentic now as it ever was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, my beginning was the same as you. It was on Battles in the North. I mean, my journey with black metal started in May 95 with The Shadow Throne by Satyricon, and that was just changed my world. So, you know, with getting into that stuff, I was reading a lot of zines and stuff, and, you know, Immortal were quite visible in the underground fanzine scene back then. You know, they were already one of the four fathers, or four at the forefront of that genre, in, you know, the Norwegian black metal scene. So obviously back in the day, you know, I'm buying these black metal albums, and but that was very early on. It would have been 95, late 95 maybe, I got Battles. I went to the old rock shop, not where it was, where we probably remember it the most. It was Derby Street, I think it was.
Okay, yeah, right.
The old Telstra building. That's
old
where
Telstra, yeah, the wooden white Telstra building.
Yeah.
So
I've walked in there and grabbed it. It was like a digipack version, and well, okay. And I don't think I wouldn't have had. So I've taken it home. I didn't have a Discman. I used to take a Discman with me everywhere, but yeah, I got home and I was like, holy crap! What that opening of Battles in the North, like it's one of the most chaotic openings to an album ever.
Yeah.
And to be brutally honest, it was too much for me. Like it was too much. I didn't understand it. It was too fast. It was too chaotic. And it took me a long time to really understand that album. So it sort of sat like, Frostbite Enslaved was a similar album for me. It just sort of sat on the wayside until I was like, my ears were ready to accept it, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I kept chipping away at it, and sort of like albums back then, you really had to work hard for to, you know, to crack, I thought. Because you were listening to a style of music that was so foreign.
That's like right. Yeah. And not
different riffs.
Not accessible in the way that straightforward heavy metal that
no,
you know, what we probably were used to.
Yeah, production wise,
yeah,
you weren't used to productions like that. You weren't used to this wash of sound. You couldn't really make out riffs, or I found it really hard to make out the riffing on this album in the beginning. It was sort of like a bit of a blur of sound, which, you know, I think is intentional. But once it cracked, or once it clicked, for me, it just, I loved it. And yeah, it's just an absolute And again, it's a great album, but at that period of time, you know, Immortal were probably the fastest band in the world. Like I've been thinking today, like Heaven Shall Burn by Marduk came out in 96. So this predates that. And it was recorded in late 94, I think. So
I'm glad you mentioned Marduk,
because funnily enough, that was the other band at the time that I used to compare. Me and my mates used to compare Immortal to, because only on the basis of pure speed, like who's faster. But you know, stylistically, like worlds apart, in my opinion. And obviously, in that comparison of bet to those particular two bands, the production values were also completely different.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you nailed exactly my thoughts. You know, we'll get more into the album as we get to it in the chronology of it. But yeah, like they weren't a band necessarily that, especially if that's your first introduction to them, that you could just swallow in one thing. Like it took years and years of me sitting with that album going, what the fuck are they actually playing? Like you could not make it. You could get like a general idea, but like, yeah, like maybe we'll never know exactly what those riffs are supposed to completely sound like.
But that was the beauty of that album at the time, and when it was sort of hitting me, was that you were listening to it, but little things were, you know, coming through, and you'd work something out. You'd be like, oh, that's a great riff, and then it would continually keep giving you little nuggets to continue progressing with it. Otherwise, you just give up if it wasn't.
And you know, maybe that was their intention, or maybe it was just they couldn't. Was it produced by Pitten?
Yeah.
Was that yeah? Maybe, I don't know how intentional that sound was, but maybe it wasn't that important because it was more about the atmosphere they were going for, the chaos, and it, you know, it's a 10 out of 10 as far as, you know, that kind of. There's no other album like it that I can think of.
Well, it sounds like the album cover, doesn't it? Like it.
Yeah.
It sounds like a.
It's a blizzard. It's a fucking blizzard of an album. They should have, you know, in some ways, I wish they'd have called that Blizzard Beasts.
Yeah, it's actually more apt, isn't it? Because
yeah.
But so that's my start with Immortal, and so once they clicked with me, they were one of my favorites, and continued to be. You know, I have to admit that the last two albums is where I sort of, even All Shall Fall, I really liked it, but it didn't hit me like, say, up until Sons of Northern Darkness, where I was really into everything they did, you know, and followed them really closely. But great band. They deserve their place amongst the greats of the Norwegian scene, that's for sure, and in heavy metal history, that's for sure. But
hence why we're here tonight.
Exactly right. So all right, we'll start and go through the full-length albums. And that's starting with 1992's greatly titled Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. It says here,
doesn't get better
for titles. Album titles.
So released July 1st, 1992 on the legendary Osmos Productions, who would play a huge part in their history. And when you think of Osmos's roster back then, they were a powerhouse when it came to this music, weren't they?
Oh, huge. They were
cutting edge for extreme metal. You know,
absolutely.
Like there was obviously Nuclear Blast there as well, probably bigger than them, always has been, but I don't think they yet dipped their toe into the idea of things being as extreme as what Osmos were willing to do. When you think about Immortal, Impaled Nazarene,
Marduk,
Enslaved, Marduk, massive bands of that time, you know. They
were the biggest, weren't they? They were the biggest bands.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. In terms of, you know, really extreme shit.
What was Mika Lutinen's techno project called?
Oh,
was that Razum?
Oh, was that them?
It was. I think I had that guy from Necromantia and it Magus Wampir Daleoff or something.
That's him. Yeah. All I remember about that band is late nights at a certain mate's house and certain levels of intoxication, and that being just complete fucking torture. And there was even I think there was even a VHS or a, you know, some form of film clip that used to be torturous as well.
I can imagine him liking that.
Yeah, you know who I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
I
Yeah.
definitely know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. Yeah, no, Osmos, full credit to Osmos. That he had a knack for picking bands that were
Cutting edge at the time.
cutting
And
edge and not accessible for the majority of people.
yeah.
Yeah.
All
Yes,
right.
and you're right. You're right. Yeah, they played a big role in Immortals, especially that what I'd call their first chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, diabolical form of mysticism we were talking about though, weren't we?
That's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll let you go first. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the debut album? And I hate the term debut, but I just said it.
Yeah, well, the thing, in truth, it's been a long time since I've actually sat down and listened to it until this week, actually. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad. It was happy memories going back to it because 1992 was pretty early in the Norwegian black metal scene. It was one of the first. I mean, it
Yeah.
would have been
Blazing Northern Sky. First,
yeah, the
first,
first.
you know what?
Yeah. Let's not mention it in case we get cancelled.
Yeah.
And yeah, like obviously Mayhem had releases out at that time, but yeah, like 1992's really early days.
Yeah.
It was a burgeoning scene, and they were right there, ready to, they jumped on it. And I think it's one of those, like I was saying before, like they're one of those bands that carved out a unique place that differentiated them from, say, Emperor, Mayhem, and some of the other bands around that scene. But at that point in their evolution, they were close. They were definitely closer. Like there were certain riffs in there that were, like there's a riff in Unholy Forces of Evil that is like beginner black metal guitar player 101 lesson. Like you want to learn a
Yeah.
black metal riff, there it is. Like so, like they had that might have later on sort of disappeared, but they had that early black metal, feeling. And to me, I love the production on it because it kind of reminds me, when I think about it, it kind of reminds me of, for some reason, it reminds me of Emperor's Wrath of the Tyrant. I don't know if it's aesthetically it reminds me of that or what it is. Obviously, that when I think about those Wrath of the Tyrant, like that's really nasty, raw as diabolical form of mysticism isn't the same, but I think there's a certain quality in it that reminds me of that for some reason, whatever that might be. But there's a certain groove to them in some of the riffs. Like, and one thing that stood out to me, I was listening to a few tracks of it like a half an hour before we started, and I'm like, you can still hear the early death metal influence in some of the riffs.
Yep.
That are still present there. That might have, who knows, they might have been leftovers from Old Funeral or Amputation or whatever. Yep. But they hadn't quite shed that death metal influence in the same way that Darkthrone hadn't shed their death metal influence on A Blaze in the Northern Sky. There's still, their crossover kind of a time where they hadn't fully jumped into what they were to become.
Yeah.
Where some of those death metal influences would move to the background or disappear entirely. On Diabolical Form of Mysticism, there's riffs there that could just be off an old school death metal album.
Yeah, well, I think it's in Unholy Forces of Evil. There's like some total death metal riffs, and they've rarely done that sort of stuff. I don't think they've done that type of riff again, really. So
no, I don't think so. Yeah, and Abba's vocals on that album are just otherworldly. Like he sounds like a man possessed. Like, yeah,
it's
just
a great
really
performance. Great performance.
It is, yeah. And like the thing I loved about revisiting it was seeing how it was like the immature version of his stylistic approach. Like he'd found things that were going to be him, and they were his trademarks, and he kind of went berserk with them. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Like
on this album, wow. On this album, he does this wow. So he does. And but then too. In the song Cryptic Winter Storms, there's this great, it's one of my favorite laughs and cackles in a song. I think it's about 2 or 3 minutes in, and he's like, ha 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 ha. And it's I love it.
Yeah.
Any sort
And
of
no one,
laughing,
no one
laughing
was.
in black metal was great.
It is, yeah, and I think his character once people were able to step out of the black metal, what do you call it, mask that they wore in the early to mid 90s, and you got to see the person behind that. You could tell, he's always been himself. Like there's humor there,
Yeah.
despite a huge amount of humor and rock sensibility and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, like it's a lot of people who are purists and elite, have that kind of elite view on black metal. I'm sure there's people out there that don't particularly like that aspect of his vocals, perhaps, but I reckon it's just, it fits.
Character.
It's character, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think back then it even showed more balls because black metal back then was to be
anti-fun
and death metal and rock and roll or whatever.
Yeah.
So he was sort of like sticking the middle finger up to the scene that he was part of, really.
Yeah, that's right.
When you think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the obvious things you can't go past saying, and this is probably, we'll say this about every Immortal album that we get to, is the Bathory influence there, especially with the acoustic interludes and the wind in the background and all that atmosphere they tried to create. That was heavily Quorthon inspired.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they'll openly admit that. And that influence, which has run throughout them, their whole career. Yeah, like it also evolved. Like they've never got away from their influence. They've never been shy of tipping the hat to their influences. But I think there's a strong feeling of early Bathory in early Immortal as well.
100%. I mean, and this album shows it perfectly.
Yeah. Like if you think of albums like The Return, Bathory The Return, and then play that before or after Diabolical Formula Mysticism, like they fit perfect. So you can't talk. I don't think you can talk about Immortal without talking about that Bathory influence.
I don't think if you didn't have Bathory Enter the Eternal Fire, that's Immortal there. That's the clean guitar sound that Immortal went for.
Completely.
It's the same drum beat.
That plotting kind of mid-tempo.
Which I steal as well. Everyone does it.
Yeah, everyone has ever since. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if it's great, use it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, overall, it's actually a relatively short album in terms of running time. I think it only goes for like 36 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, 7 tracks, and that's including an intro. So it's literally 6 proper tracks, 34 minutes 59. So
yeah,
short and just they don't mess around. I mean, the intro is that acoustic with the wind sample thing, isn't it? But
yeah, and I think like it's just a classic debut album, really. Like it's
sets the tone.
Yeah, hopefully it's one that they look back on and they're proud of their work, because it was in a way a blueprint for them to, or a platform for them to progress from.
I do remember Abbott in an interview. It was probably quite a while ago, maybe at this around Sons of Northern Darkness era, and he said that he'll go back and listen to this album purely just because it transports him back to, and it's the first album, so obviously you've got that very special feeling, because it's your first album, and he was just saying so, like, how proud he was of it, and rightfully so, because it's a great album, a great first album, and
that's really cool,
because I guess I'm guessing these guys were probably late teens around that time that they recorded it, like when you're getting into black metal and, like your mind's wandering into those kind of mystical places at that age, like you'd agree with me. You think back to that time in your life, like it's hard to recapture it.
It's impossible, really.
Yeah, youth and, the idealism and the fantasy aspects of it. And
it was just a feeling and an atmosphere. It's nothing can come close to that feeling back then. That
no,
you can get little glimpses of it, and you're happy to get that glimpse, but you'll never be immersed in it like you were.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Um,
Listen to us sounding like old codgers.
back in my day.
Nostalgia.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah, me personally. Actually, do you have a favorite track off this one?
I think Unholy Forces of Evil.
Yep.
Would be my favorite. And I don't think we can leave this album without talking about the Call of the Winter Moon film clip.
Thank you for bringing it up. It crossed my mind about 3 minutes ago, and then I forgot about it because I was being an old man talking about nostalgia. But yeah, you go forth, and it's one of the best.
What can you say? Yeah, it's, you know, in one way it's funny because the album itself is like almost like you can't pick a thing out of it and laugh at it and write it off in any particular way. But then you have this film clip,
which is comical.
It's really comical, and it's like it really fucks with your mind to think, you know, like we said, they were fully serious about their concept, and musically they sounded like a fully serious band. But then to see that film clip, I don't know if it was just their youthfulness and then naivety, and maybe I don't know, maybe because it was, you know, 1992 and they were developing what this whole black metal aesthetic was supposed to look like. But then you had characters like Abbott who grew up on Kiss and the idea of Gene Simmons and that, and you know, maybe it's just an example of that kind of influence. I don't know, but whatever the case, it's entertainment, pure entertainment gold.
It has some of the best facial expressions, but I'm not sure if you remember the scene in that video, but Colgrim, I don't even know who he is. Maybe it is Padden under a different name. I'm not sure. But Colgrim wearing the pointed hat.
Yeah.
And he does this little really weird sort of walk where he's shuffling or something. It's bizarre.
You reckon they had a
band meeting one day, and they're like, all right, well,
they choreographed the whole thing.
Gentlemen, if we're going to be a band, we need to all have our own individual walks for the film. I think I'll take the crab walk. What about you, Colgrim? I'll take the shuffle.
I reckon they had like months of meetings about every little move they were going to do.
Yeah. To wear the hat or not to wear the hat. Yeah.
Yeah, how the hat won, I'm not sure, but
that's a rock paper scissors on that one.
If he stayed in the band, can you imagine the cover of? It wouldn't be Grim on the cover of Pure Holocaust. Yeah, with a pointed hat.
Yeah, it wouldn't have had the same effect, would it? Really?
No, and that would have been absolutely comical. They would have been a joke.
Yeah,
before they were considered a joke.
Yeah, you're right. But I mean, in one way, when you think about it, it says a lot about the band that they're not just remembered for that one film clip early in their career. Like it didn't hold them back from huge success and becoming like as iconic as they were. But it's like anything. Like if you look back at photo albums of yourself at a certain age in life, you go, you know. Like,
well, there's some great photos of me, you, and a friend of ours donning the corpse paint and swords, and very intoxicated.
Resurfaced only recently, didn't they?
And I love seeing them when they resurface. It's just brilliant stuff.
Well, you know, that's kind of sums up what I was saying. You know, like for those guys in that scene, like they were part of it. It would have been such a magical kind of time probably to be involved in something so extreme and obscure and like, you know, real. Well, you know, real to some extent for certain individuals, but
just don't name them.
Yeah, just don't name them.
don't name them. I mean,
maybe we could refer to them as current residents of the country of France or something like that.
We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Current farmer in the French countryside.
That's right.
I think this
Your favorite track?
I'm going to go with Cryptic Winter Storms because that's a very Bathory-esque song. I love it's just something about that fade in of the acoustic, and it's like a nylon string acoustic. And the plucking just sounds great, but it sort of just goes in, and that's got that laugh in it. It's a great laugh in the middle of the song, and But yeah, the Bathory influence on this album sort of reminds me of songs like I said before, Enter the Eternal Fire and Call from the Grave, that sort of era of Bathory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Same sort of chords, mid-paced. Immortal never struck me as like influenced by the fast Bathory stuff. It was always the mid-paced stuff. So
it's where they got their epicness from, in a way, probably. Yeah, like that.
Yeah,
that mid-paced plotting and tones, guitar,
almost like guitar tones, and definitely on the cleans and all that sort of stuff. That's straight from that kind of influence. But yeah, I don't think when we talk about Immortal on those albums like Battles in the North being intent on speed, I don't feel like that came from a Bathory influence necessarily. They could obviously tell us the truth about that. But yeah, I think that was just the need to be extreme at that time, and speed was probably the way to do it.
I also think it was in that, maybe there was a bit of healthy competition between bands in Norway. They were like, well, someone's playing like this, so we're gonna, let's be faster than this band, or
and I guess
a way of being original.
Yeah, well, and I guess too, you got to think about their place in Norway and who they were probably not in competition with, but in the same circle as Enslaved. They had Trim Torson on those early albums, who was fucking just a really fast drummer, and pretty
exactly
closely they're all pretty closely connected.
One thing I did want to mention about Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism, because for me, I was late coming to this album, as far as, so 95 I got into Battles, and I'm pretty sure this was the one I got later, so I probably wouldn't have heard this until around 96. And
well, for me it would have
been even later, because I think for me it would have gone Battles in the North, then Blizzard Beast came out after that, and then I think I kind of started working backwards from there. I know I owned Pure Holocaust possibly before I owned Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism, so I kind of did it in a funny kind of order with Immortal.
Yeah, me too. I think I actually think I heard Pure Holocaust the last out of everything, like the first 4 albums. So but yeah, I mean, this album, I always found that it sort of had a and it doesn't sound like Samael at all. Like, it's what you were getting to with the death metal influence, but it's got that real devilish, medieval satanic vibe. Like done something in a dungeon or something. Just really devilish, evil music. Like an old, like Worship Him or something.
Good point.
They don't sort of they never really touched that feeling again, because they moved on to the Blizzard style. And so this album's a really cool snapshot in time for what bands were doing, especially on Osmos. You had like Rotting Christ and Samael and stuff, and I think they were like Immortal was sort of, while forging their own way, but they were still rooted in the old evil satanic death black metal scene, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. They hadn't developed that bigger concept that they were soon to latch onto. At that point.
But great album, totally
epic.
Worthy.
Great album. Yep.
All right, we move on to the next album, which is Pure Holocaust from 1993. I'll just bring it up so I get my dates right. Released late 1993, November 1st. Again on Osmo. That's pretty late, isn't it, when you think about it?
Late 1993.
Did you say, or 94?
93. So
93,
November 1st, 93. I'll let you go with this one. What are your thoughts on Pure Holocaust?
Well, in terms of the performances, it was a big step up, I think, from the first album. I think this is where we start to see Immortal's tendency towards blast beats and that speed that steps up in pace in coming albums. The production's obviously crisper. You can hear differentiation in the riffs that which is funnily enough It's probably, I kind of prefer the production on Pure Holocaust more than I do probably Battles in the North and even Blizzard Beasts. I think it's for that early era of Immortal. I think the production, it pops out a lot more for me. Like, it's still cold and grim and all the things that you'd expect from a Greg Holland production, but yeah, in terms of the guitars, at least the drums are sort of. I always had a bit of trouble trying to figure out what the drums were doing in the background. I don't know if they were drowned out a bit or it was just Eric Brodskrift's performance. Like,
that's the thing. So Abbott actually did the drums on the album.
Oh, he did he?
So Grim was purely.
That's right. He was just on the cover.
Yeah. So and the tour. I think he done the Fuck Christ tour.
Yeah.
with Blasphemy, Rotting Christ, and Immortal. But yeah, so it was.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yep.
I don't know how Abbot's drum performance is tighter on this than it was on Battles, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this before. Like, certain albums, I have a. It's usually associated with the album cover, but the music itself gives me certain like colors, and I get like this gray, black and white kind of feeling about the music as well. It's kind of grainy in a way, but I like the production on it, and I just think there's space in between the fast bits where they develop. You know, they continue with that. I don't know, like the way Demonaz played guitar, he had the elements of that style that Euronymous was associated with that influenced so many people, but he didn't overdo it, or he didn't, like, it was there, that kind of sweep picking kind of style in the more mid-tempo and slower parts, but I always found he did it in a kind of different way. I think sort of down lower on the neck of the guitar rather than Euronymous sort of playing it up on sort of like maybe the 9th fret or something like that, where it was.
Well, good point, because I mean, the opening to Unsilent Storms in the North Abyss is the rings out. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's just open.
Yeah, just an open chord played down lower, but yeah, and I feel like where Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism, a lot of the song, like, that was like one complete journey for me. Like, maybe because the album was so short, like, it was easy to listen to that and feel like it was just all one thing that you could listen to as one thing. You could just pick a track off Pure Holocaust and be happy, and it stood out on its own.
Yeah.
But really, like a really solid follow up to a first album, I feel.
Yeah, I think this is the album that sets the tone for where they're going, at least for the next 3 albums.
Yeah.
Speed wise, and it's like they really wanted to show people they meant business when it came to the speed side of things, the aggression. But to your point about Demonaz's guitar playing, and I think in the credits, I think they sort of done half and half on this album when it comes to songwriting. So Abbott was doing a lot of writing riff wise, even though he was playing bass at this time. So you sort of imagine how the Abbott riffs would turn out with him actually playing the riffs on this older stuff. I mean, you can probably hear that on the live versions, but I mean, one thing I noticed about Demonaz is that, he had the black metal Euronymous sweep style, which you mentioned earlier, but he also, which I didn't pick up on a lot of black metal bands doing back then, was because they were more, like say in Isan, very open, not palm muting, not chunking, being chuggy. He chugs it up a little bit, slightly. It's not overbearing, but he definitely had his own style, which definitely. I thought. I don't know what drove them to for Abbott to get on the drums, and maybe it was just like, well, no one's available to play the fast stuff. We know the songs, I can do it.
And
I reckon you probably hit the nail on the head there, because they were, essentially Immortal at least up until, the later years has been, let's just face it, it's been a duo. It's been a partnership between Abbott and Demonaz.
Yeah.
And they've brought people into that, but essentially the creative core of that band has been those two people. So yeah, you can imagine, their brain, they had two different brains, but the Immortal brain was, shared in a way.
Yeah.
So maybe it wasn't a massive departure for him to. Well, you and I played guitar plenty back in the days, and we're both distinctly different. But when you come together with a certain person, the ideas just tend to, they either fit or they don't. And if they fit, you go with it, and it works.
Yeah, makes something unique as well.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that you couldn't do on your own necessarily. Well, you can, obviously, but there's something I'd like to say about that when we get to the last two releases. I'll save my commenting on that.
Yeah, I've got a few things to say about, and I don't want to be overly negative, but we'll leave it till then.
Yeah.
But I mean, another thing I wanted to bring up with, say, starting with this album was how I remember bands being massively influenced by, like, every, say, demo level black metal band around this period, say 94 onwards, they were ripping Immortal off, not musically, but when it came to Winter Storms and song titles, massively long song titles.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yep.
So they were influential in the next crop of bands coming up, and those bands using Immortal as an influence. Again, I never really heard a band successfully mimic Immortal musically. I'm not sure if you have.
No, I can't think of one,
to be honest.
Yeah, but they sure as hell spawned a lot of people who tried to copy them lyrically, and the long song titles.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, and I think that's testament to the fact that they did, like I said early on in the piece, like they created this world that was just like this fantasy realm. I don't like using the word fantasy realm because it conjures up all kinds of different images of elves and shit like that. I'm not talking.
You know who it makes me think of?
What's that?
It makes me think of Luca Turilli.
Rhapsody. Yeah, not that kind of fantasy. But like I said, it's a realm. It's a place that doesn't necessarily exist on this earthly plane. But it's so, like you said, it was so influential in terms of where it must have taken people's minds, and what they were able to express through their lyrics in combination with that style of music. Like it was. Yeah, like you can see why people went, well, fuck yeah, I'm going with long song titles that, and the longer and more weirder, the better. Like black metal is the best genre in the world for ridiculously long and obscure song titles.
Well, then you had bands like, Balsa Goth, for instance, who just went ballistic with their song titles.
Well, they're not a band I'm really familiar with, but if you want to share any of their ridiculously long titles.
If I had one prepared, I would. I probably won't. No.
I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, and I don't want to have to search for a long period of time and ruin the flow. But I will text you one later.
All right, sounds good.
But they've taken it to a new level of length when it comes to song titles.
Yeah.
Not slagging them out or anything, because they've done their own thing and good on them. But but getting back to Pure Holocaust, 1993, late 93, it would have been had a huge impact. No one was playing this fast back, this period. Marduk probably had what, those of the Unlight maybe, where they definitely weren't playing that fast. What was that? Opus Nocturne hadn't come out yet, I don't think. And I'm just really struggling to find a band who was playing as quick as Immortal at that time. So
definitely
one of the most
definitely not in the Scandinavian
sort of sphere of that I can think of. Not at all. And like I said, I have to remember sometimes how early on those first two albums really were in the scene, in the timeline of it all.
Right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
So what? Euronymous died in September '93, and this is 2 months after it. So
there you go. Yeah,
and would have been recorded, obviously months before that. Again with Pitton and at Grieg Hall. So my favorite song off this, I've got a couple actually, but I love the chaotic beginning to Storming Through Red Clouds and Holocaust Winds.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because when we were just talking about titles, I'm like, that's one thing, like not just Immortal, so many black metal bands came up with those long titles that they didn't go anywhere. Like, it was the English language, but this, being an English speaker, I still don't know what they're talking about.
No, well, they must, but
yeah.
That's just a really chaotic opening. Like the riffs are, I don't know what he's doing there. Like, and I actually think that Abathroat and that the opening riffs don't even sound like Abath. He never used to play ultra single string. He was more of a chord guy,
Yeah.
But
Is that
great.
I'm just trying to think.
Is that the track? There is a track on Pure Holocaust where there's a really chaotic
and jangly sort of riff.
Yeah, and then there's a break where the drums stop, and then it's sort of like it's almost like an error that's been left on the album, on the recording. It could be that track. I could be wrong, but yeah, it's definitely on that album, and it's like they just left it in. Like it's jangly is a good word.
But I actually think the final 4 tracks on this album are the strongest. Like, of course, opening with Unsilent Storms and the North Abyss, great track. A sign for the Norse hordes to ride. Every Sun that's actually got great songs on it. Now that I'm going through them, and I don't want to go through everyone, but
that's right.
And that's the thing, like I've sort of over the course of this week been through every album and tried to say, oh, what are the standouts? But it's kind of hard with a lot of Immortal albums. I don't think they left a lot of filler on any of their albums. Like there's not a lot of songs that you could say didn't really deserve to be there in the mix of the others.
As the Eternity opens, if I'm going to choose one, I'm going, and that's one of my favorites to text random lyrics to people when I've had a few too many drinks. I'll just bust out some.
That is a great one. Great chorus, and he's just repeating that, just saying the title of the song in the most grim way that he can.
Yeah, this section of lyrics here. In an hour of the night, I hear summoning voices and wake from my funeral sleep. In time before light, in crypts of eternal deeps, dust from my grave blew away with the wind. On a cryptic journey onto the other side, beneath the mountains and past beyond the gate below. Fantastic stuff.
And what is a cryptic journey?
Exactly. A journey into a crypt, or is it a journey that you're not telling anyone? Like you didn't know the directions.
Well, there's a sarcastic cave in this song. What's a sarcastic cave?
Sarcastic cave.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'd like to sit in one of them.
Floating evil reign with fear in these sarcastic caves. So
lost in translation.
Yeah.
That's all I can put it down to.
And that's the one thing I will say about Immortal lyrics is that as much as I love Immortal, their lyrics were never my favorite.
Yeah.
And they were rife with, grammar errors or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
But maybe that's part of the charm, obviously, as well.
I think so. Yeah. I almost wouldn't want it any other way. They're one of those bands that you had Emperor, like bands like Emperor and Dissection and like those bands that it was just someone pouring their heart and soul into every aspect of it. I think the concept was important to Immortal, but how they articulated it, not necessarily.
It wasn't sophisticated.
Wasn't as sophisticated in that sense, at least. Yeah.
No, Demonaz wasn't sitting there with a red wine just going,
No, that's right. Well, maybe he was. Who knows?
He could have been, yeah.
Yeah. Unlikely, though, I reckon. Yeah.
So,
great album. Great album. I'd agree with you as the Eternity opens. And probably The Sun No Longer Rises.
Great song. Great song.
Yeah.
All right, moving on. before we get on the battles, I just wanted to mention the name of the VHS because we forgot the name. It was called Masters of Nebula Frost.
Oh, yes, it was too.
That was it. Yep.
Yeah.
Masters of Nebula. Just had 2 tracks.
Yeah. How could you forget that? Yeah.
All right. We're up to album 3. And we have, oh shit, what have I done there? Everything's gone blue. Just give me 1 second. This isn't very professional. All right, here we.
It's a true early 90s, tribute in terms of professionalism.
Oh mate, I'm terrible when it comes to tech stuff, so expect the worst. Yeah, so Battles in the North, released May 95. I'm pretty sure from looking at the back of the album cover, it was recorded late 94, which makes sense. Again, on Osmos Productions. We both spoke about, this both being the album that we heard first. And I think, anyone our age who was into this music probably was exposed to this album first as well. It was the most visible at the time. But yeah, you speak about Battles in the North.
Yeah, well, I think, again, it's like I said before about Pure Holocaust, I feel like songs on that stood out from each other as individual tracks. Whereas for me, this album, Battles in the North, is just like I think of it as one whole thing. And I think in the early days, it was probably the case that I thought that way simply because there was so much of it that was indecipherable to me at that time. And the speed of it, just, you kind of latched onto it and you were along for the ride. Like it kind of had that
35 minutes feeling as well. So it's a quick album.
Yeah. So, and that's one of those things with the early Immortal albums that it distinguishes them from later releases where they just packed so much into a short space of time simply because they were for the most part, blasting through a lot of it. But Battles in the North, I feel in some ways delivered at least 2 of their most iconic songs, that being the title track and Blashik Mighty Raven Dark.
Yep.
I think they're probably the 2 standouts too, funnily enough. They kind of bookend the album. For me, everything in between is great as well, but just like you said, it's almost too much. Like, I think if you have a hankering to listen to Immortal, you'd have to really be in the headspace to choose Battles in the North as the album you're going to listen to.
Yeah. It's not an easy listen, that's for sure.
Not an easy listen. No, I think that's the thing that stands out to me the most. But in one way, I think it's the album that has the most character, and it's has the most unique atmosphere out of all of them in many ways. All because of that.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about Pure Holocaust having a bit more space production wise, on this one, it's a lot more claustrophobic, a lot more. There's no like the riffs tend to just be very suffocating, whereas like you said, there was more space. You could make out individual strings and riffs and whatnot, whereas this one's really you got to part the fog to work out what's going on.
That's exactly right.
And you mentioned before the Demonizer's guitar style. He wasn't one for playing single string sort of tremolo picking kind of stuff so much. If you listen to a lot of his riffing, it might not have just been him, might have been Abbott as well, but a lot of it is barchordy sort of stuff, just played extremely fast
and covering the whole all the strings. It's not just the top. It's like, and he'll do the Mayhem Euronymous thing.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like that sound in itself is a really washy kind of full open ringing sound, and you combine that with the cacophony of the drums, and I don't know how many other layers of every other instrument are there, but I think it's just so dense. And so what you just said is exactly right. Like, how do you part your way through what's going on there to find the melody, because there's heaps of melody there, and there's heaps of epic atmosphere, but it's buried, and you got to work for it. Like it's not background music that you can just be necessarily like tapping along to and getting about your business. Like if you want to listen to that album and appreciate it for what it is, you got to spend time with it, and you got to.
I always got the vibe back then that the people who, I don't know, that there was like almost like a novelty factor to being this album was more about like, oh man, I like it because it's extreme, it's fast, without actually grasping what they're doing musically, what's going on underneath the surface. Like I find, Circling Above in Time Before Time is one of my favorite Immortal tracks of all time, one of my favorite songs on this album. And we're talking about the single string sort of tremolo riffs, and that song actually opens with very simple, that real simple. Then it goes into like very, very Abbathy type chords, but played at a faster thing. There's a lot of melody there in that track. Again, on this album, I feel this is where they start with the iconic clean guitar sound, which isn't an acoustic, it's just a clean electric sound. That's which comes from Enter the Eternal Fire,
absolutely. Yeah.
So for me, this is just an absolute classic. And it's just a complete another thing that threw me off about this album. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but and you'll probably remember from back then about how albums would certain songs on certain albums back then from the Norwegian scene wouldn't fade out, or there'd just be like a cut.
Yes.
Bang. That was it.
Where did it go?
Yeah. And sometimes it hadn't even quite finished. Like, I think Abbott's still screaming at the end of Battles in the North. He's like, "Wah!" And then it's bang.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it was sort of extreme in that way too. It was sort of, I don't know. I don't understand why that's the case, but I guess with a song, especially like Battles in the North, it was such an abrupt, like just from, like you're straight into it and you're straight out of it. It just comes and just fucking belts you over the head, and then it's done and you're on to the next song. Well, maybe that's the intention behind it. I don't know, but yeah.
I think it has to be, because I don't recall thinking about it now and going through these songs. They're all like really quick.
Yeah.
Descent into Eminent Silence starts with a Bathory plod, but everything else is and Blashik, obviously. It's just bang, 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 bang in going into the next song. No beating around the bush there at all.
Yeah. It's almost like they're raining
blood in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, but also when we get to the next one, that's sort of it's in that same realm, but maybe with a different sort of what do you call it? Well, just the execution's different.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, final thoughts on Battles.
I think in many ways it's even though I think it's the hardest of their albums to listen to, it's probably one of the closest to my heart, simply because of the fact that it was my introduction to the band, and what atmosphere and imagery, what the imagery created for me, in friendship with my friends group, and what that album meant to a lot of people, like yourself included, in that period of time. Like it's like anything. It's like your first love with a band, like you remember it. So it's like you said, it's an absolute classic.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely one of those albums that if you persevere with it, and not everyone might. I'm sort of coming at it from how I was as a kid, and coming, probably my ears were very. Maybe kids can pick up things differently these days because they're more exposed to more extreme music or something. I'm not sure, but
perhaps, yeah.
I find that this is a very rewarding listen if you give it the time and like listen to it properly. There's a lot there to work out, and it's not so immediate. So
that's right. Yeah, it doesn't give you.
It doesn't give you what later Immortal albums gave you more upfront. Like you didn't necessarily have to work for the later material, but that one, that was, like a cult album, really. I think, in their discography, like most Immortal fans would probably consider that a pretty cult album.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so we both agree, great album. And we move on to 1997's Blizzard Beast album. I'll just bring up how great am I at the technical side of things?
I'm glad you're doing it.
Not me.
Surprised the computer hasn't blown up yet.
Save that till right at the end.
I will be entering the eternal fire. But, so we've got Blizzard Beast released early 1997, February 24th. Once again on Osmose Productions. Their fourth album on Osmose. They actually do quite a few on Osmose, up until Damned in Black, I think. So I think
was it at the Heart of
Winter their first album on Nuclear Blast?
No, that's still Osmose.
Was it really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sons of Northern Darkness was the first Nuclear Blast.
Yeah, you're probably right. You could be right. Yeah, you're probably right.
We will find out. Don't let me say. Let's find out.
Let's. That's a good.
Oh, I'm pushing boundaries.
Blizzard Beasts.
Yeah. So recorded. Doesn't say where it's recorded. Actually, studio change. We got rid of Greg Harlan. And I remember around this period, Demonized was actually working on a solo album at the time called Perfect Visions. I remember it because he used.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
But apparently it was meant to be like in a real, almost like he mentioned like Fields of the Nephilim sort of style. So like maybe like a goth.
Yeah, I was going to say it was more a goth.
A dark goth kind of style from memory. Yeah.
So that was a thing for a while. And then it never... I'm pretty sure it was before this, or maybe it came after it, because maybe he started doing the Perfect Visions thing after the Arm issue, which sort of happened after this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, something we probably
need to mention. He obviously had to have a change in style to be able to continue playing music.
Yeah. So this one recorded at Sigma Recording Studios in September and during September to November 1996. It doesn't say who produced it, just says the band produced it. I'm sure there was an engineer there, but Sigma, never heard of that place in Norway. I've never heard of other bands recording there.
Not before or since, no.
And if I remember correctly, like I could be completely wrong here, but I do remember an interview with Abbott where he talks about possibly the recording process for that whole album being really, really chaotic and difficult in the first place, or it could just be that they just weren't happy with how it turned out sound wise.
Well, I mean, I was listening to it last night and I like the songs. It's what I find strange is that it sounds like it's been recorded in two distinct sessions.
Yeah.
Like Blizzard Beast, Nebula Ravens Winter, Suns That Sang Below, and Mountains of Might seem to have the same sound.
Yeah.
The other tracks have got a more, particularly the drums and the guitar sound, have got like a more of a thinner.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And there's like a more polished sound to the guitars and even Frost Demon Storm. Yeah, so it's like half and half's been recorded at a different time and they just haven't matched up the sound.
Yeah, it's a good point. I've never thought about that, but I think you're probably right there. There is a bit of a mismatch going on with the sound on that album.
Yeah. Sort of like what happened with Dark Throne on Total Death. That had two different sounds going on as well. And and I guess in this day and age that wouldn't happen necessarily because everything's so finally you can
you can do things now that you couldn't back then, and it could have been, who knows, Sigma Studio might have packed up and moved, and then they went and recorded the rest of it in the new one, and you know, who knows what could have been happening.
Yeah, and like, I mean, and also like minor changes in studios can create big differences as well. Like, so someone slightly moves a mic or something, and you'll never get what the original thing was. So
and
you never know.
And you know, recording that way, it could even come down to the, you know, the sound and the acoustics of a particular room that you record an instrument in would give a different quality. You know, when you break down sound, and I'm not a sound techie kind of guy at all, but my understanding, you know, like subtle little differences can make a world of difference when it comes through in recording. So there's every chance something like that's probably gone on with Blizzard Beast, I'd say.
That's one thing I've learned doing my own stuff, is that tiny things matter, and you don't realize it until you're doing your own stuff. That that gives you like more insight into what bands go through, I think.
Which I guess is you know, the whole idea of going and recording with a producer, you know, like that you cut out so much of that learning process, and hopefully you jump into the hands of someone who's gone through all the trials and tribulations, and you know, because time's money, I guess, isn't it? You know,
exactly right.
When you've got a label that's paid for studio time and that kind of thing, like you got to make it work.
Particularly back then, when it was, you know, labels were forking out big dollars for studio time. Now these days bands can record at home, and
exactly.
Yep.
So
give me your thoughts on Blizzard Beast.
Well, I think it
closely, obviously it follows Battles in the North in their discography, but for me, it because it was the second album of theirs that I'd heard, it was I wasn't too taken back by the production at that point in time, because Battles in the North was so harsh, like it wasn't that huge a jump to have the production on Blizzard Beast. But the thing that stood out to me was there'd been a fairly dramatic change in riffing style. Like they and the word that sticks out to me the most when I hear Blizzard Beast is the word compression. Like there's a heap of compression in the sound, and the riffs sound really like punchy in a way. Like it's a real punchy kind of, like, obviously there's that atmosphere and melody aplenty there, but there's so much. I know a lot of people back in the day, you know, talked about Morbid Angel influences and, you know, this whole kind of death metal thing. I get it, but I don't. I think that it was the beginning of what Immortal were trying to do by combining like more open style of riffing with the harshness and the atmosphere of earlier albums.
Yeah, because I mean, I definitely hear some Morbid Angel in there, and I thought to myself, because they toured with them on Battles, that had some of that just being with them, and has that carried over, and then. But you make a good point. I don't think it's more probably they're playing in similar speeds and similar time signatures and whatnot, but they've just defined the riffing a lot more.
Yeah,
you know, they're probably playing like that on Battles, but because the production was so weird, you couldn't hear the riffs.
And this was the first album with Hawg on drums too, wasn't
it? Yeah.
Yeah, so like that's a big change too. And I don't know much about his background before Immortal, like if he came from a more of a death metal kind of background, but
apparently he was more of a heavy metal traditional priest sort of guy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But the drums are definitely more compact, and there's a lot more double kick kind of sort of stuff happening there. Yeah, I think it's obviously, it is definitely stylistically different from the three albums that came. They're venturing, you know, let's just call Immortal a black metal band for the sake of easiness, but at this point in time, they were starting to explore other genres of metal, or create their own version of it anyway, and leaving some of the more black metal elements behind. yeah, like you couldn't strictly call Blizzard Beast a black metal album. I don't think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think for me, I sort of get the vibe that they pushed the speed side of things to the as far as it could go. They weren't gonna, which would move on to like what we get next album, you know. Again, like it's got a similar sort of flow to start with as Battles, doesn't it? Like, because it just goes straight into Blizzard Beasts and just goes ballistic, but then it comes back a little bit straight away with Nebula and Suns That Sank Below, which are a bit more, wouldn't say mid-pace, but a bit more epic, bit more dynamics, you know.
Dynamic is a good word
to use, because I think where Battles in the North lacked dynamics, it was pretty one or two dimensional. There's another dimension to Blizzard Beasts.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the big take from this album, and I really like it, it's probably, for me, Blizzard Beast is probably the worst out of the first four for me. Like, and that doesn't mean it's a bad album, but it's just where it sits. But to me, Mountains of Might is just, you know, obviously it's the big song on the album. But that sort of showcases, I think, where they were sort of going to go with the epicness. And
that song's almost like a bridge between
the two eras. That's exactly what I was trying to say earlier on. There's these distinct kind of chapters or eras in Immortal's career and there's an album, or in this case, even a song that is the break and the bridge between those two. And I think what you just said is spot on. Mountains of Might's the big song on that album for me, and I think probably for most people.
Yeah.
And
again,
it leads perfectly into what was to come for the next, say, 4 albums.
Pretty much. It's and I think this album, I mean, this is the start of the more defined riffing, like you said as well. So and obviously after this album, Abbott takes over guitars and he's got a more distinct riffing style and a more, he's actually got quite a cold guitar sound, hasn't he? Like, whereas
definitely.
But I mean, this album, it's sort of, I'm trying to transport myself back to that period of when it came out. I think it seemed from the outside that they lost a bit of steam coming off Battles in the North. And because they did tour for this album, I'm pretty sure. But I think when they toured, Abbott had already taken over guitars, and they actually got Ares from Eternus to do. He filled in on bass for the tour. So obviously he was out. Iscaria must have come in for the tour for the next one.
I think what you said before,
out of the, if you classify the first 4 albums as an era, you're right. Like, in a way, Blizzard Beast is kind of like the unpolished, kind of weak, or it feels rushed to me. It just felt a bit rushed. Maybe not in the creation, in the writing, but definitely in how it was produced and then what the end product was. Because I think all the songs are really strong. I think they all, they probably deserved, in one way, like I love the production because it's really, that's Blizzard Beast. Like, it's really,
nothing sounds like it, does it?
Yeah, that's right. But in one way, I feel like it would have benefited from the productions that they had later on, you know. And I think they often, I'm sure I read something where Abbott kind of talked about the idea of re-recording that album at Abyss Studios at some point. Whether that would have been
that'd go down well.
Well, yeah, whether that would have been a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. And it never happened, so it doesn't matter. But I think they're kind of, you know, coming back to that Bathory influence, the first 4 Bathory albums are really distinctly one chapter. Like, I put them, like, a lot of people talk about the first 3 as a trilogy, and I get that too, but I'd almost include Bloodfire Death as a 4th companion to that. And I could almost say the same about the first 4 Immortal albums, because Blizzard Beast kind of represents, it's still connected to the first 3, but it's the bridge between the first 3 and the next lot of albums. So there's kind of,
I mean, Blood, Fire, Death is the definite bridge to the Viking era as well, though, isn't it? Of Bathory. So
that's right. Yeah,
makes
I guess that's what I'm saying. It's sort of they've kind of followed a similar trajectory as one of their biggest influences.
Yeah,
maybe subconsciously, and it just manifested that way. There's a parallel there for me.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that. That's really cool to think about, actually. You've blown my mind.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple of favorite tracks, which is, I love Nebula Ravens Winter and Sunset Sank Below.
Oh yeah.
It's a great song, but I mean, Mountains of Might is such a, what I'm like. I'll text random lyrics from that song.
Yeah.
But
they're some of the best.
The fast songs are really cool as well, but I think once people got their taste of what they could do with the epic stuff, I think that's where, like, once I saw that again, I was like, oh, that's what I want, more of that.
Yeah.
So, because you've got your fill of the fast stuff on Battles and Pure Holocaust, and
it's what you come to expect from
Immortal, and then they throw a track in there like that. That's just, it's not that they hadn't done epic shit before that, but that took it to a whole new level. Yeah. And I think in the whole history of the band, that's still, I think most Immortal fans would have to have that pretty highly up on the list of one of their best songs ever written.
Absolutely.
On an album that's probably the least liked by most people, funnily enough.
Yeah, probably not. I don't know. Now it probly sits about mid table. Yeah. It's look, nothing sounds like it in their discography. You got to give it that. It's definitely
right. It stands alone.
Yeah.
All
right.
I'd agree with you. Mountains of Might and Nebula Ravens Winter, two standout tracks for me.
Yeah, excellent. And I've got to mention ABBA's great vocal performance on this album. That's his, like, of the first 4 albums, even though it's my least favorite, I think that's his most unhinged, grim vocal performance.
Yeah, it is. He's a full demon on that album.
He was just going for it.
Yeah.
Cool artwork as well. Like,
yeah. Oh, and I cannot finish talking about this album without pointing out the great smelling booklet inlay.
And it was hard. It was that thick paper, wasn't it?
Thick. Yeah, it was almost before its time. It almost looked like recycled cardboard in a way.
Yeah, it wasn't glossy. It was that paper. But also, I bought the version that had
not glossy.
Not glossy.
Not glossy.
I had the etched jewel case CD cover of it.
Oh wow!
And of course, it broke in my school bag. So I paid $40 for the etched version, and
oh no,
didn't look after it. So
what a shame. Yeah, no, that was one of the that's one of the bonus joys of Blizzard Beasts, was you'd pass the booklet around just to get a sniff of the ink.
Yeah, it really did smell strong.
It was good. Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional, like if they went into the factory and went, look, we need to have a good smelling booklet to go.
Don't get me started on smelling booklets, because I'm the king. That's the first thing I do when I get an album.
I actually got caught doing it recently. I can't even remember what album it was I bought, and my partner saw me doing it. And
what are you doing?
What the fuck are you doing? It's like, well, it's the first way of telling whether this is going to be a good album is how good the booklet smells. Well,
to me, it's a nostalgia thing as well. It's like,
yeah.
I can still remember getting the Shadow Throne and opening up that CD and the booklet, the smell of the booklet. Like, I can still smell it.
Yeah.
Even though the booklet doesn't smell like that anymore because it's lost its new smell. But
that's right. It's weird too. It's like some weird tangible aspect to buying an album. I guess because it's a sensory experience too. Like, you're engaging your hearing, you're engaging your sight through the imagery and it's like your body just wants to take in. If you're a true fiend of music and fanatical about the bands that you love, like, it's a whole experience. And I remember in that time where burning and piracy of CDs was starting to come in, I was really staunchly like, no, I don't fucking want I don't care.
I remember that.
Like,
yeah,
like that. It's like it's only one aspect of the whole release. So why just eat one? It's like having a plate of food and eating one ingredient.
Yeah. Like back then, I was so obsessed to, like, I just wanted the music at any cost, or no cost really. But you know what I mean. I wanted it, and But now collecting again, and that it's so much better because you just feel way more connected to the music. I feel anyway.
Yeah.
I know that sounds cliche, but for me, it's the truth.
It is. It's completely the truth, and I haven't really gone back down that road of collecting, but for those friends like yourself and others that have, like, like I can see what it's reconnecting to something that was super important back then, and it still is. Like there's more to being a music fan than just downloading songs and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. Look, I remember you had a really good collection back in the day. So it's like you've been there. You've had. I had a very minuscule collection back in the day. So I'm living the dream right now.
Well, I also had the time to listen to them too, and that's life changes, and like you squeeze an album in on the way to work or whenever you can. So like, yeah,
that's true.
But yeah, definitely those little simple things like the sniff of a booklet, super important. Yeah.
All right, and we're back, and up next we have Immortal's 5th album, At the Heart of Winter. Again, I'll just bring it up, and this is a really important album in their career. Obviously, arguably the biggest changing point on many levels, especially when it comes to style, and also Demonaz departing and Abbott taking over all the songwriting, and just it was a stylistic shift, which I feel worked. But it was I don't know. I'll go through the stuff before we actually start talking about it. But so released in 1999, February 22nd, again on Osmos Productions. I remember first hearing this album on 3 Hours of Power, or the first track, Withstand the Fall of Time, and going, wow, this is a bit laid back and different. It still sounded like Immortal, but it was different. And I remember a few people, that we used to hang out with, weren't overly impressed with it. But what were your thoughts upon the release of At the Heart of Winter?
I'm almost certain I
bought this album overseas when I was traveling.
You had the clam box thing, I remember.
I did too. You're right.
It was some weird box version. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, exactly. And I can't remember where I was, but anyway, I'm sure I bought it while I was overseas traveling. So I too had the Discman, and and like I don't think I knew what to expect musically, like prior to it, because it wasn't a time like it is now where you'd get a single release and you could hear a track or anything like that too much. But I remember everything about it felt fairly different to me. Like it was like, because I think my early experiences were with Battles in the North and Blizzard Beasts, to go straight into At the Heart of Winter was, I think I almost heard it before I even heard the first 2 albums, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So it was like it was a shock to me. I don't know. I remember it didn't take me long to like it, but it wasn't like an immediate click for me. I was like, a lot of the riffs, or not a lot, there were certain riffs in there that really shocked me. Like, that's just a really simple kind of,
very primitive,
or almost like that could be like I don't know, like a ZZ Top riff, or like just something really simple. And I thought it was almost like a step backwards in progression in one way, until later on, and I realized that no, it was the beginning of a new a new idea that had been a new direction that had kind of been hinted on in that track Mountains of Might in one way. But I think, yeah, for me, it only started to make more sense in the context of the next two albums that came after it. I liked it, but I wasn't, and like, you can't deny its catchiness. Like, it's super catchy and like some great hooks and vocal lines and stuff like that. Like, it's class. It's, yeah, like it's epic in its scale. Like, the songs go for a long time, and it's just every song's a complete journey. And like, I find it hard to think about the tracks without listening to them and go, oh, what's that track do? Like, you know, like, I can't think of them in that way, but it's like the back of my hand when I do listen to it. You know, every little bit that's coming.
Yeah.
You know, so I've obviously spent a lot of time with that album, and you know, like, it's had its claws in me, and I completely understand it now. And when I, like, over the course of this week, listening to it again for the first time in a long, long time, in relation to the next two albums after it, it's the first stage of development of where I think they were going and where they reached their peak. This, for me, wasn't their peak, but it was their first statement about what was where the band was heading. And
I think,
and just, yeah, like you said, like, with Abbott taking over songwriting duties and guitar duties and all of that sort of stuff, a certain, like, you know, there was a demonized factor in all of their albums up to that date that you didn't necessarily recognize until it was gone.
Yeah.
And then it was the Abbott show, essentially. But there was still that continuity of what made the band, you know,
It's still,
lyrically, thematically, you know, yeah, the melancholy and the melody in their big riffs.
the style was still there. It was just done through a different, I don't know, style of guitar ripping, and it was more, I don't want to say streamlined because the songs go for 8 minutes, but I mean, it's more heavy metal, traditional heavy metal bass, but with atmosphere in the riffs, and yeah, there's black metal riffs in there, obviously.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Hawg's drumming was very driven by the riffs on this album. I mean, and he was like that as a drummer from this album onwards, but he played very simplistically and what the song required. Whereas if you get like a Trim or a Hellhammer, they're just fills every 2 seconds and
heaps of embellishment on
yeah. And I like drummers who can just sit back and play what the song wants rather than I get a bit annoyed by busy drummers if they're just being busy for the sake of being busy.
Totally.
I always had a lot of respect for Hawg and his willingness just to do what the song required. I don't think Abbott had he obviously played guitar for a long time and that, but he was slightly a bit sloppy on this album. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, hadn't
quite stepped into the role of being the guitar player, or you know, taking the lead in that respect. Yeah, like, and that, you know, I think that was an Immortal thing anyway. Like, they were never completely polished.
No,
you know, and
even wasn't perfection.
No, not at all. And that's the rock and roll thread that had always run through the band. You know, like, it was just a fucking, you know, like, they were there, and like, Abbott as a character, as a human, like, is a complete, you know, not knowing the man personally, but every little bit of, you know, detail you can get about him and what you could back then, he's just, you know, like a, you know, Lemmy worshipping, you know, madman, you know. And it was some of that mystique had kind of probably left the band on this album for me. And I don't think it was helped by some of the band photos in the booklets as well, because it became very cartoonish and quite laughable at that point. So I think the songwriting, production, and all of that was new, and then all of a sudden you also had this. I mean, I don't know. It's not a new thing for Immortal to have had like kind of funny photos, or we talked about diabolical full moon mysticism, but
who who went to Hawg and said this is a good idea to wear this, and why did he agree?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like he's one of the guys from Lost Horizon who were ripped and.
That's right. No,
I felt sorry for the guy.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And you combine that with the logo change. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but
it was big for me. I hated logo changes.
Me too, especially that one. And the fact that it was the first album cover that didn't have them on it. So there was lots of different elements, or lots of elements that made Immortal had kind of been pushed aside, and a new Immortal had kind of come up. And it, I can't help but think it, like, put the music aside, there was almost like this rock and roll wrestling kind of element to them in terms of what you were visually seeing. So, and like we were saying, like for people like us, especially back then, like that actually did mean something. Like people could say, "Oh, what a fucking like." It's about the music. Yeah, of course it is. But black metal especially was always more than just the music. So if you traded in part of that, like, you did lose something. But in terms of it musically, like, they were never more catchier than what they were up until that point, at least. Like, it was, yeah.
If anything on this one, I really love this album, but some songs might overstay their welcome for like a minute or two.
Yeah, good point.
Or certain sections might drag on, but that's me being ultra picky. I really like this album, but I also think with At the Heart of Winter, this is where they became visible to the regular metal scene. Yeah. This is when all of a sudden the kids who are into Pantera and Slayer or whatever were like all of a sudden going, "Oh, I like him. I can listen to Immortal now." That they became more palatable to that group of people, whereas before that they were in underground fanzines and untouchable to that next level of not next level, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and maybe that
was an intentional move on the band's part to step into that space of not seeking out a different audience, but needing to step more out of that isolated black metal world that they'd existed in for nearly 10 years up until that point, I suppose. In some ways, if you go back to the earliest, collaborations between some of the members.
Another point would be, sorry to cut you off, but another point is, with them getting bigger, would be that out of the Norwegian bands, they were always the one band that were really into, like, they gigged a lot.
Yeah.
The live show was a big thing. So they were out, they wanted a tour and whereas, your Emperors and that they toured, but it was never on the level of Immortal.
That's true. And, maybe that point alone, and, Abbott being such a performer and such a, big energy, it's logical for a band and a performer that is a big live act to want to create music that translates really well live
on the stage. Yeah,
you could not get up there and play Battles in the North, in its entirety every night and have people. Or it'd even be interesting to the you as a band either. So, and coming from that background that they did of hard rock and heavy metal, it would have, to continue on the band as a live touring act, like, they were always going to move into a space where they became more big, and not big as in popularity, but big as in sound.
Yeah, and to me, this is one of the better Abyss productions, and I think Immortal got the better Abyss productions in general compared to other bands at this period. Like, you remember back then, where basically every Nuclear Blast, every band was going to Abyss.
Yeah.
Say from 99 to 2001, it was like, and every band sounded the same, didn't they?
There were some terrible ones, and
like when we get to it, I don't even love the production
Raise
on
Hell.
Raise Hell, yeah. But Damned in Black, I think that's, of the Abyss albums, I think that's the production I like the least.
Okay, interesting.
I'll get to that. But yeah, I agree. I think there's a real steeliness to the sound, the guitar sound on this album. It's sharp and crisp, but full as well.
And a big drum sound, a lot of reverb, a lot of open space.
Yeah,
I think where it works is like on a song like Solarfall, where you've got those really cool clean guitar bits, and the clean guitar bits on this album are really some of their best. Like, it's very epic
for sure.
Works
definitely.
perfectly.
I think too, being a not being like, for most of their existence, they were a 3-piece, and that's only live. Like, I mean, there was not a whole lot of room for, like, you didn't have 2 guitar players going, oh, now I need to put down my rhythm section, and now I need to put down my lead. Like, being that 3-piece kind of configuration creates space, because one guitarist has to create a sound equivalent to having 2 in a way, and Abbott was up to the task big time with that. So, but I just think, like, it's a less is more kind of situation. And I think Immortal were always really good at doing that they didn't, like, because that, there was never a distinct lead guitar component to it. It was just about riffs.
Pretty much.
There's no flashy wanking on any, like, they try.
And he's not that type of player.
Nah, not at all. Not at all.
He was a riff guy.
And neither was Demonaz. I mean, Demonaz used to throw some solo attempts in there, but at
the end of Grim and Frostbitten Kingdoms.
Yeah.
It was a very
but no, guitar solos were never their thing. So it just allowed space, I think, in the production and recording and writing in general, that it had an openness to it.
All right. So what are your favorite tracks, or your favorite track off At the Heart of Winter?
If you ask me today, I think Where Dark and Light Don't Differ would probably be my favorite.
I agree. That's that and Solarfall for me.
Yeah. Good choices. Yeah. Hard to find a weak song on it, though, to be honest, because I knew you'd ask me this question. And I'm like, fuck, how am I going to come up with one? I could, maybe other albums it's easier, but this one, it's sort of, they're all just as solid as each other, if you ask me. But yeah, Where Dark and Light Don't Differ has always grabbed me. Like, just some of especially that chorus riff. I love that chorus riff. Yeah,
it's great. It's a absolute riff fest, that song. I think the one song that didn't really grasp me as much as the others, and it's still a really good song, is Years of Silent Sorrow.
Oh yeah.
I think it's good, but there's something about it that's not as strong as the others. The title track, At the Heart of Winter, to me, that's the most simplistic. Such a simple song.
Definitely. Well, especially that opening riff.
Dun, 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 but it's almost like he's playing it open, like the E up higher up on the neck, but he's got some other melody that's making it sound like he's shifting. That he's actually not shifting; he's just staying on that one chord the whole time.
Yeah.
If you re-listen to it, it's
I'll have to go back and
creates this sort of illusion.
Yeah. But when I was talking about riffs that took me by surprise, that's the one the most. I was like, what the fuck? Like, they've thrown that kind of riff into as an intro riff to a song too. Like, pretty ballsy.
It sounds like a riff that a certain bloke we know might come up with. A nice simple riff.
Simple riffs. Simple riffs. Yeah.
But I mean, I love this album.
And it got such great critical praise too, this album.
Well, they got they were on the cover for Metal Maniacs for this, and Damned in Black, weren't they?
Yeah, it really launched them into the stratosphere in a way, this album, which surprised me, because to me, like I said, like, it took me a while to adjust to this new sound. But obviously it hit the right spot for a wider audience, or people that might not have been into him so much up until that point.
My big memory of this album was, because this is going to sound very nerdy and not very metal, but back in the 90s, I used to read this hiking magazine called Wild. And I used to, and it was like everything was just like track notes, and people had gone on walks and stuff. So I'd be like reading all these track notes and of these people doing these awesome hikes, and I'd just be listening to At the Heart of Winter, and I'd be like right there. And I was just like, oh. So whenever I think of this album, I think of those times of like reading this hiking magazine, which is very odd.
I don't think it sounds that
odd at all. It sounds pretty appropriate to an Immortal conversation. Yeah.
But it's funny how, music and memory and smell and memory, everything's like really, it's just, everything's connected, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's an album I grew to love. I think especially when you and I connected on it. I think you opened my eyes to that album a lot more than I could open them myself on my own. But I think once you and I kind of really started deep diving on Immortal, that's when it clicked for me, because I know how much you enjoyed it, and I'm like, yeah, now I get it. Yeah.
Well, I sort of have the recollection that you were more into Damned in Black, and then you got more into At the Heart of Winter.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe a bit later, like
definitely
around 2000, like a year later or something.
Yeah, that'd be pretty true, I reckon. Yeah, and Damned in Black, we'll move on to that now, but that grabbed me straight away.
Yeah, well, we will move on to that right now. So up next, Damned in Black, Immortal's 6th album again, and it's their final album on Osmose. So this is March 27th, 2000. And what a band to lose if you're a label. But obviously the payout from Nuclear Blast might have been, unless it was like a end of a contract or whatever. But
it could have been.
Yeah, but at that point in time, once they'd released At the Heart of Winter, you would had to think they would have been their biggest band on that label.
I'm pretty sure hearing back then that both At the Heart of Winter and Damned in Black sold like 100,000 each.
Yeah.
That's when people were buying shit,
That's right. Yeah. And for a label like Osmose, who'd been around for a long time, I guess they also had back in the day Dark Tranquillity as well, who they reached a fair bit of popularity probably around a similar period of time. I don't know when they made the jump to another label, but I still don't think it would have matched Immortal for
Mind's Eye was on Osmose, wasn't it?
Osmose,
so
yeah.
Projector would have been the Century Media first album.
Possibly, yeah. But yeah, you're right. Like maybe it was the end of a contract, or who knows? Yeah, who knows?
Speaking of, before we go on to Damned in Black, what's a crap Osmose band that you remember? Raise 'em.
Was there a band? Do you remember the live festival, the Osmose Festival? And there was a band at the start of it. I think was it Demoniac or Demoniac?
Oh, they were from New Zealand, weren't they?
Yeah, they were a Kiwi band, I'm pretty sure.
Well, didn't they morph into Dragon Force, or one of the guys was in Dragon Force or something?
Did they really?
I'm sure one of the guitar players was in Dragon Force from Demoniac.
Yeah, right. The Rocking Dildos.
I remember the name. Never heard of them.
I think it was Mika Luutinen from Impaled Nazarene's side project with Herv, the guy from Osmose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was sort of Motorhead punk with just sort of disgusting pornographic lyrics. Basically, it was a good fun album.
And Osmose went down that road with like Swedish Gehenna, Inferno, and all that.
Yeah.
Bewitched, the thrash sort of stuff.
Retro thrash. Yeah. It's obviously where his interest lay. It sounds like Herv must have just been a guy that if you liked the band, he just signed him. It didn't really matter whether he thought they were going to be popular or anything like that. And that's probably why it was such an iconic label at that, through the 90s.
I think that's what's lacking in today's
just
music in general. Like when it comes to labels, is that they're more focused on, hey, is this going to be the next big thing? Or if they just went for what I mean, that doesn't make money. You could have some great band that you love, but doesn't mean they're gonna sell.
Yeah, but it may not have mattered to him at that point. You know, it was just a guy who was probably into what he was doing.
On your deathbed, you'll be happy with what you did, but
that's right.
It mightn't have made great business sense.
No, that's right. Yeah. Good memories.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll get off talking about the rocking dildos.
Yeah. Yeah. Damned in Black.
Yeah. So, what do you recall from Damned in Black in 2000?
I think for me, I think the reason this one was easier for me to like more immediately was it harkened back a little bit more to the earlier Immortal, in terms of it opened up with like there was that speed element, like that frantic kind of they'd kind of brought a little bit of that back in and married it with the best parts of At the Heart of Winter, but it definitely had a bit more intent and went for the throat a bit more than what At the Heart of Winter did. While still,
it was tighter and compact,
definitely
wasn't
tight. Yeah, tighter playing, but still retained the atmosphere that they'd had on virtually every album. So for me, it felt like a bit of because I wasn't completely sold on the direction. I don't want to use the term direction change, but the change in the band, I wasn't completely over the line with it until Damned in Black came out, and I'm like, no, this is, I see where this is going. This is good. I can, I can get on board with this now. And I think it probably helped me appreciate At the Heart of Winter more once I understood it a bit more.
Isn't it funny how that can happen? Like you might be sold on something, you can go forth and then you can go back and then it really clicks. It's it never ceases to amaze me.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And just when you're ready for something and when you're not ready for something,
That's exactly right. Yeah. But no, I really loved it. Wrath from Above, the second track, I think the riff I'm going to talk about.
Oh yeah, one of the best.
Yeah, probably one of their. Yeah, I heard it again the other day for the first time in a long time. I was at the gym actually when it kicked in, and I'm like, I think I lifted an extra 10 kilos on each arm when that riff kicked in.
Well, you're walking around like that.
Yeah,
the arms out.
Yeah, just flexing.
Too good.
No, it's that song for me. That's probably the standout. Like, I know we're jumping straight into standouts, but that song for me, it's awesome.
Back to the guys on the cover, and again, it's quite comical. We've got Iscaria as well. We've got to mention the member change,
the new bass player.
Not a change, addition. We'll go with. But yeah, I mean, they couldn't get worse than what happened on At the Heart of Winter, as far as being comical and people think it was a joke. But there's still some sort of weird comical aspect to it. It's very it's almost figurine like, isn't it?
It is. I heard it, just that album described like musically as their most devilish album.
Was that I remember an old Metal Maniacs, and they were, the way Abbott put it was in the mindset was more about going back to where they started with Diabolical Form of Mysticism.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not so much musically, but just getting away from like the
Blashet concepts.
Yeah, and sort of just, snow and whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But yeah, it was kind of a distinct aesthetic change in terms of, the blacks and reds on the album cover and all that kind of, it did have a different feel to it, that album.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And going through the stuff, recently and going through this thing tonight, like it's actually quite different when you think about it, like compared to At the Heart of Winter. It's quite a change itself again. Like what you mentioned with the fast material, like comes in with Triumph, which is again really fast. One thing I noticed last night was when I was listening to In Our Mystic Visions Blessed, track 6. The opening riff is very almost Blizzard Beast sort of Battles in the North type.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it goes into the more chunky sort of riff.
Yeah.
But there's, like you said, there's that direct link to the chaotic era, but then keeping the more refined riffing of at the Heart of Winter.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell what they were trying to do there, because in a way, At the Heart of Winter was fully experimental for them in a way. Like it was, like long songs, heaps of riffs, lots of different passages and breaks. And like you said, like some of them might have gone on a little longer than they needed to. And I can't help but feel that Damned in Black was a conscious effort to
shorten it up again.
Bring it back a little bit more to, like keep where they were going, but get to the point a little quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the whole, I think they did a great job with that album in general. I don't really recall, without knowing every song off the top of my head after such a long time, there being any standout weak tracks necessarily.
No, there isn't. Yeah. I'm looking at the list now, but also what I'm noticing looking at the list is that the only 2 songs that really resemble anything sort of like what was on the previous album is probably Against the Tide, again, which is a classic track. I love that song, and Absolutely. And maybe the final track, Damned in Black. The rest are quite fast and sort of, but also a bit different. So
I find this album kind of hard to talk about in a way. Like it's a fantastic album, and I loved it then, and I, listening to it the other day, I still loved it. But other than talking about it in reference to the previous album, it's kind of, I find it a bit trickier to talk about.
Well, I find this one to be like, like I mentioned when I was talking about Battles in the North, that Battles was not an easy listen. Whereas I find this is like a pretty immediate album.
Yeah.
It'll hit you and you can get into it straight away.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got energy. You're not really searching for what's going on. It's all there.
Yeah, it's way more straight to the point and in your face. And then again, like it creates another logical step to what comes after, I feel.
Yeah. Are you ready to move on to the next one?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we can't really talk more about Damned in Black, can we?
No, I've kind of run out of ideas with that one.
And I think we probably got more into Sons of Northern Darkness than Damned in Black. We were really into Sons of Northern Darkness from what I recall.
Oh, big time.
It was a massive album in 2002 for us.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, probably the biggest for me.
So yeah, pretty much 2 years after Damned in Black, we got Sons of Northern Darkness. A bit of a play on words. I mean, that originally was on Pure Holocaust, I think. Inside the booklet.
Yes, yeah, it definitely came from their past.
The Sons of Northern Darkness or something. Yeah. Sons of Northern Darkness or something.
Yeah, like that. Yep. Sounds right. Yep.
Yeah. So again, 2 years later in February 2002, and this one is their first on Nuclear Blast. Iscaria still in the band. He was on both Damned in Black and Sons of Northern Darkness.
He was, yeah.
Give us your thoughts on this album.
Well, for me, this is where they peaked. This was the culmination of everything that came before, and it had every element you would want in an Immortal album. Like it pretty much as close to perfect of an album as you'd pretty well get. Like there's every track. Finding it hard to find the words for, but yeah, for me this was years of honing their craft, trying new things, and then it all came together on this album in the best possible way. Like it's kind of like what would you say? Like, there's elements of Battles in the North on this. There's elements of Pure Holocaust. There's elements of just about everything to do with Immortal. You can find it represented on that album in one way or another. But I think where they were wanting to go with this epic songwriting, where At the Heart of Winter was awesome, and the songs meandered. The songs were just so well written on Sons of Northern Darkness, and they had that epic feel, but just like this tight power within them that, like, yeah, just incredible songwriting, and like just not one bad riff on the whole album. Like, every riff on this album is a classic, if you ask me.
And I also think that what they, coming off the back of Damned in Black, is that they went back to the big spacious sound of At the Heart of Winter, and this album has got quite a bit of At the Heart of Winter vibes on it at times.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've also got your tracks like Sons of Northern Darkness, which is retaining like a more thrashier vibe, like on Damned in Black, but also one by one, that middle section's pure rock and roll.
Yeah,
which tells you where Abbott was probably heading with the Eye projects, So there's, but I mean, Antarctica, Beyond the North Waves, they're just epic songwriting of the highest order, a lot of Bathory in there, but he does it in a way that's his own riffing style. It's not ripping.
No, it's a nod to Bathory.
Yeah,
and all the way through their career, but there's nods, but it's definitely not getting anywhere close to copycat at all. I think also this was the best Abyss production that I can think of any album that came out of that studio. I don't know, you might disagree. I don't know. For me, this had the best. I don't listen to this album and focus on the fact that it was recorded in Abyss, whereas some albums you can't get past. Like, I feel like Damned in Black, I didn't really say that when we were talking about it, but Damned in Black has more of that typical Abyss production,
sound.
Whereas this is just, it's almost
heavy.
like,
this one, it's quite heavy.
Yeah, really heavy.
A lot of bass, a lot of bottom end.
Big time. Yeah, it's not as thin as what Damned in Black. Yeah, just, I think Peter Tagrin had obviously worked with him on the two previous albums, and you can see the growth that he took with that band in the same way that the band grew in that, through that era.
Yeah.
And I think the band and the producer just completely peaked on that album in every way possible. And
he was just,
also, just one of those, perfect storm of things coming together all at the right time.
Well, I think Peter as well is probably, imagine him though, like he's got this band who've got they're not coming and going, I want to sound like Dimmu Borgir. I want to sound like Enslaved. I want to sound like Immortal. Immortal sound like Immortal.
Yeah.
Straight away, as a producer, it must be so hard when you got these young or just bands coming and going, oh, just give me the Enthroned Darkness Triumphant sound.
Yeah.
And that and I remember hearing that a lot of that was happening, that back then, bands were just like, give me that sound.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the issue with a lot of the Abyss productions. It was that he was just doing what the band wanted.
And probably doing what the labels were wanting him to do as well, and it was, he was in such demand. His books were full and there were certain bands he could just go, well, there's the settings, boom, boom, go, that's my sound. Thank you very much. I'll collect the paycheck for that. But then you had other bands come in, and a band like Immortal, I think, because it's so rooted in true heavy metal, especially at that point, rooted in true heavy metal songwriting, it was there for him to fuck up, really. They prepared and written that album so perfectly that they kind of, wouldn't say made his job easy, but like it was low hanging fruit to bring your best production into it.
I just remember this album coming out and listening to it so much, like it was a big deal back then. And I had the digipack and it had a nice smell to it. I'm not sure if you had the.
I did. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
It had a distinct
Good smell.
It had a distinct smell to it because it was made out of that hard sort of it wasn't glossy.
Not glossy. Not glossy.
No, it was hard stock paper or cardboard or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Hawg, probably his he's got better but he was really on top of his game on this album.
And he was embedded as the
drummer. This is his 4th album at that point too. You know, he's working, you know, because they either did it between themselves or had, people come in for individual albums. Up until that point, it was, 4 albums in with the same drummer and essentially the same lineup. You know, that kind of consistency was probably something they didn't have.
No,
in
I think
the early days, yeah.
And I think you can really hear that, Abbott and him were really tight knit with their performances and the hours of back in the day when guys were in the rehearsal room working hard,
exactly.
Let's nail this down. Song wise, what are your favorites?
This is going to be hard. Like when it first came out, I loved the first 3 tracks, One by One, Tyrants, and Sons of Northern Darkness and Tyrants, or whatever order they go in. Daemonium is probably the only one I could say is my least.
I agree with you.
Favorite on that. But then once you get past that middle part of the album and that's where it, I don't know. Beyond the North Waves is probably got to be my favorite. Like, it's got to be. Yeah.
Great lyrics.
Yeah, it's by far their most triumphant, like raise your fist to the fucking sky kind of feeling song that they'd done at that up until then, or ever, really, if you ask me. But
I remember quoting those lyrics on the beach at Nelson Bay that time. That was classic.
Well, I think we just, at one point in our lives, I think we just spoke in Immortal language.
I think that was it. Yeah, it was it.
Yeah.
That's answer the phone.
Yeah. Just a croak. Yeah.
Just exactly. A croak. Yeah, I feel with this one, like, I mean, Tyrants is the hit. It's not my favorite song, but it's the hit song on the album, isn't it? It's the catchiest. It's the one that people are going to gravitate to who aren't really, your average metal fan was going to hear Tyrants and go, "Oh, that's a cool song. It's catchy."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Demonium, I agree. It's probably my least favorite. I still rate it, but it's not my favorite song. Yep. One by One is a great opener. It's fantastic track. But I feel the final 3 tracks are the strongest on the album. So In My Kingdom, Cold, Antarctica, Beyond the North Waves.
I think you're right. I think it
just ends with just perfection.
You know how like so many albums start off so strong and peter out towards the end?
You cannot say that about this album. Like, it starts strong, stays strong, and then just, like you said, those last 3 songs could easily be my favorite songs individually on any given day.
Antarctica,
that album. Yeah.
Oh, such a good song. And
probably is it their most epic song? It could be.
It's definitely up there. And it's odd that he's singing about Antarctica when they're up in Norway.
Isn't it weird? I was only thinking that yesterday when I was listening to it, going, it's a departure.
Just thought, he's probably sitting around with Hawg going, well, it's cold, let's do it.
There's more ice there than anywhere else in this world.
It's a cold place, let's do it.
Well, if you want to talk about their concept of Blashik, it's probably the most likely to exist there.
As he said, it's the coldest place of all.
Yeah.
One thing, two things.
Massive and unconquerable, in fact.
And it actually is, isn't it? When you think about
it. Totally. Yeah. They did. Yeah. Great song. But anyway,
Okay.
sorry.
He didn't
interrupted you there.
mention any elephant seals in the
No,
lyrics though, which is
no,
bizarre.
they never dropped one mention of a seal in
Oh.
the whole Immortal history.
If you're gonna sing about Antarctica, you got to sing about elephant seals and
yeah, fucking leopard
penguins.
seal. They're angry. They're angry. They're black metal as hell.
Oh no.
Uh,
So you saw the band on this tour? Oh, no, not tour, but you saw them at Wacken in 2002, was it?
I did. Yes.
And who was the bass player? I was thinking today. Was he from Pain?
I think his name was like Saroff or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, yeah. He might have been from. I think he was a Swedish dude from memory. Yes. So yeah, 2002, the first year I went to Wacken, and I knew that they were going to be like, they obviously weren't a headliner, but
And they played during the day, didn't they?
yeah, like sort of mid to late afternoon.
Yeah.
But I've relived the memories of this of that gig, and like just yeah, at that point in time, Immortal and Dissection were probably my two favorite bands. So to get to see one of them at least, like, goes without saying how, you know, I traveled to the other side of the planet to go to a festival, but essentially I traveled to see Immortal.
Yeah.
And all the other bands were bonuses at that point in time. But what I remember, like, I, you know, got my spot in the crowd, and like I tried a few different spots out while it still wasn't, you know, too crammed up. I'm like, no. And eventually I got stuck wherever I was. And you know, the banner was up behind the band, and you know, that anticipation before you see it. And I remember catching a glimpse of Hawg walk out on the stage, and no, that's not true. I heard Abbath Checky's guitar sound,
So
and it was just that like that backwards bar chord kind of chunky kind of thing, and then sort of Hawg came out and did a bit of a, you know, testing his drum, and I've still never heard a crowd like at fever pitch like that. Like it was, the crowd was ready to just explode. And yeah, I'm sure they came out with one by one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, great memory. And probably at that point, maybe still like probably the best band I'd seen live. And it was just a best of, like, yeah, they played all the songs you wanted. No, that's not true. They didn't play Battles in the North. That was my only disappointment. But
wonder if that's because they're at a festival and they've got the time restraints and all that kind of stuff. But I think back then, or even they tended to lean heavily towards the At the Heart of Winter onwards material, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Definitely, yeah. They threw in a few old classics. Like it could have been.
Did he fire breathe to Unholy Forces of Evil and stuff like that?
There was definitely fire breathing. I'm guessing it would have been to that
or Call
song.
of the Winter Moon, one of those.
Yeah. I mean, it's 21 years ago now, so, so it's kind of hard to remember. But yeah, my feeling when I think back to it, my feeling of that gig still Mortal at Wacken 2002. Yeah, so like I was saying, great, a memory that sort of lives on in my body, even though it doesn't, you know, the memories have somewhat faded from my mind, but the feeling of that gig was just, yeah, something else. So I think what was almost as good as the gig was coming back to Australia and having our drunken nights of metal, and me being able to relay certain aspects of it to you, who, you know, unfortunately you didn't get to be there, but
no,
you know, like, yeah, I think you shared my excitement talking about that gig almost as much as I had from being at it.
Oh, I was just sucking all that energy in, you know, like I wanted to know every detail. I still remember getting the phone call from when you're at Garage. And we won't go through the Enslaved meeting, but how was your short chat with Demonaz?
Sure.
And what did you ask him?
Yeah, well, those people who will end up watching this who may or may not be aware that there's a well-known metal pub or club in Bergen in Norway called Garage, which, you know, is sort of the place where, at least back in the day, and probably still, the Bergen metal scene kind of congregated. And it was actually 2 years after that Immortal gig I was
04, was it?
back there in 04, and I stumbled into that club one night and happened to bump into some of the biggest luminaries of the Norwegian black metal scene. And I didn't know it at the time, but this I was sitting with Grutler from Enslaved, who was a really lovely fella, and he introduced me to a whole heap of people. And Harold, or Demonaz, was one of them. But yeah, in my drunken state, I don't think I paid much attention to the fact it was. I remember saying to Grutler, like, sorry, who's this? He goes, Demonaz, Demonaz from Immortal. I'm like, oh, Demonaz, super, once I cottoned onto who it was. And I remember saying to Grutler from Enslaved, ask him where Abath is. And he, asked him in Norwegian, he's out of town. was the response.
He's
not too impressed. He's out of town. Yeah. But that's my claim to fame with Immortal. I once met Demonaz you probably took one look at me and went, who the fuck is this idiot? Like, and probably left the table straight after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome memories for you though, man.
They were good memories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good. Yeah.
All right. So,
Sons of Northern Darkness. For me, that's where that's peak prime Immortal for me. Like, flawless album. If I could give it a 20 out of 10, I probably would.
I think this is the period where. Do you remember what happened after this? What was the reasoning for the split, or was it just they burnt out? I don't remember there being any sort of like we're breaking up because me and Demonaz are fighting or any of that bullshit. It just seemed that they dissolved, and all of a sudden Abath's working on what would become and that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah,
I don't recall there being any controversy or anything like that result. I think you're right. I think it was just like, we don't know, we've been doing this for a certain amount of time, and they burnt out and stepped away from it. And maybe they thought, fuck, like, how are we going to top Sons of Northern Darkness? Like, maybe that was the pressure to live up to that album might have been at that point in time too much, and it was like, we have to step away from this for a while and figure out where to go from here, because it was such a successful album for him too. Like, it was just,
yeah, it was big. Yeah.
Big. And it was so critically acclaimed and still is to this day, So yeah, I don't recall the exact circumstances around why the band dissolved when they did. But in saying that, obviously can't have been a falling out between the two, old mates, because Demonaz was heavily involved on the I album too. He did all the lyrics for it, and
that's exactly right.
Sort of took that background role like he had in Immortal since he departed guitar duties. At least it was sort of a similar thing. So yeah,
I just don't recall what the thing was, but yeah, obviously they just
need to step away and do something different for a while. But
Abath needed to get out of town.
It may be, yeah. He's out of town for longer than he thought.
5 years.
Yeah, at least. Yeah. So but it was a bit of a shock from memory to learn that they weren't going to continue.
Yeah, I mean,
but I don't remember it being like, when certain bands break up and you're like, that's it. Like, someone dies and that's it. I never felt with Immortal like it was a permanent departure.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of felt, I remember thinking like, they'll come back one day, sort of thing. So
yeah, I just don't recall it. Yeah, like in the media hearing a lot, and but here we are, 2009. So what? That was 2000. So it was 7 years. That's
7 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So September. Yeah. Well, I mean, we saw them in 2008, so they'd obviously reformed a year or so before All Shall Fall.
Yeah.
Done world tour. We saw them in Sydney. I thought they were great. But, and then they come out with All Shall Fall. So what do you recall from what was your experience with this album?
Yeah, well, obviously high anticipation, on the back of Sons of Northern Darkness, which we've just talked about as being so important. My expectations were high. Look, to be honest, when it came out, I was pretty stoked on it. Like I thought it was really good. I thought there's some really good songs. There were also some songs that I couldn't even tell you what they are now. They're obviously ones I skipped over. Like I think it's the second track on that album.
I actually
You've probably
like
got the
that
track list up. Do you?
I like the Rise of Darkness. The ones that don't
The
stand
Rise
out
of
to me,
Darkness. Yeah.
Hordes to War and Arctic Swarm are the ones that I don't really
Yeah.
go much
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Hordes to War. You don't like that?
It's what I noticed recently listening to it was that Hordes to War is like one of their few nods to Fast Bathory.
Absolutely.
And then next track is like back into Fine Day to Die.
Yeah,
worship,
exactly.
Yeah.
Hordes to War to me sounds like it could have been on Bloodfire Death. Like it reminds me heaps like Golden
Peace
Walls
Till
of
Death.
yeah, or even DSRA or something. Like it has that Bloodfire Death kind of fastness to it. And actually that was the one that I loved the most.
Wow.
Like in the early days. Yeah,
okay.
And I still do. I think it's different for Immortal, well, not different, but being such a Bathory fan, and especially of that era of Bathory too, like I gobbled that track up straight away. I was like, yeah, because their Bathory influence had always been there, and for me that was just like, fuck it, we're just going to totally like wear it on our sleeve for this one track and
just go for it.
Just go for it. Yeah, and I think they did it justice. But I agree with you. There are some tracks on there. Arctic Swarm, yeah, doesn't really give me any feelings whatsoever. What was the other one you said?
I said Hordes to War.
Oh, Hordes to War. That's right. Yeah.
Another one I can bring up is Mount North. That doesn't do a whole lot for me either.
Yeah, yeah. But I feel Unearthly Kingdom, they end with
good
probably
song.
the best song on the album.
Yeah.
I fucking love that song.
It's a shade below North Waves, but it's in that realm.
Definitely.
It's a really cool song. All Shall Fall, even the title track, it's a good song.
Strong.
It's not a great song.
Yeah.
There's not much going on there riff wise. It's a bit
I mean, production and
the whole package, it felt like it sounded good. Like I liked the production on it, but I just like it's you think about it, a curve, an upward trajectory of a band, and then you reach the peak and it's just starting to tip below. Like it's not by any means a bad album. I'd probably put it next to, I don't know, maybe even Damned in no, I don't know. It's hard to say really.
I think Damned in Black's better than this.
Yeah, I knew you.
But
I do too. If I'm being honest, yeah, I don't know where I'd put it, but it's definitely on the slipping downward side after those couple of albums that came before it.
I honestly think that the solo Abbott album smashes this album.
Which one in particular? The album?
Album, yeah.
Oh, me too. Completely. Yeah.
I think because that was 2006. This was 2009.
Yeah, I agree.
Every song on that album was great.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. I would definitely put that album above All Shall Fall if it were an Immortal album.
Yeah.
And, it's not too far off being an Immortal album, if you ask me.
It's got the elements. It's a bit more rock and roll, though, isn't it?
Bit more rock and roll, but there's those epic kind of elements to it in certain tracks, like Far Beyond the Quiet.
That's one of the best songs he's ever written.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, it could be on an Immortal album. Could have been on Sons of Northern Darkness and fit perfectly.
He sung very Quorthon on that song, though.
Yeah,
very very Quorthon.
Yeah. That was his opportunity to explore his Motorhead and Bathory kind of influences in one place, I think.
I need to re-buy that album. I have to get it because
Yeah.
it's a really good album. But yeah, I mean,
it's a cracker.
I actually think the opening track, because it was the video track, it tended to. I think it gets more attention because of the video.
Mm.
And the middle section when they're doing that breakdown with it's a rip off of Hell Awaits by Slayer.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
yeah.
And not that that's a bad thing. It's good that they threw that in there, but yeah, I like the Rise of Darkness. There's something about that, and Abbott's voice in that song is very. I found his voice got a bit more less deeper on this album. It was more higher pitch and bit grimmer sounding.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, if you remember back to At the Heart of Winter, remember he went a bit lower and less. He didn't sound as energetic. He sounded a bit more laid back.
Yeah, okay.
But then he brought it back for the next two, and this one he's.
Yeah, I see what you said. Yep, I know what you mean.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he gave big performances on Damned in Black and Sons of Northern Darkness.
Yeah, like I think he done vocally. He's fine on this. I'm not a big fan of the guitar sound on this album. It's got some weird. It's not as cold. It's got like a woody, warm sound. For want of a better word.
Yeah. And I think he probably, where he went after that too with his Abbott albums. That first one sort of came out, and I kind of put maybe I can't really remember how close they were in terms of release, but sort of same thing, like a couple of solid tracks, but like
not great.
not great, no. But I classify them as kind of similar albums.
Yeah.
I
think actually, so if you look at what I was talking about, the guitar sound before, so this one's actually recorded in both Grieg Hull and Abyss. So I'm thinking maybe the guitar sound at Grieg Hull, but then again, that's got a notorious sort of cold sound. But
interesting.
So does Abyss. So I wonder what they did at both studios.
That's an interesting bit of information. I didn't know that about that album.
Yeah. So maybe drums at Abyss.
Because it's when you think about it, they're distinctly different sounding studios. I mean, you can't, obviously different albums and different bands sound different depending on the studio, but to combine studios, interesting experiment, I suppose. The old and the new.
So what's the the verdict on All Shall Fall?
Look, solid enough album, but I don't think it was ever going to live up to Sons of Northern Darkness for me anyway, regardless of how good it was going to be.
Yeah, I think my thing at the time was that like you said earlier, I enjoyed it, but it just didn't have there was definitely no staying power to it.
For me, it's a forgotten album in a way. Like when I think about their body of work as a whole, I don't know if it's because it's disjointed in terms of its release date from the other albums that I kind of forget about. But I almost forget that it's there. It's almost like they ended after Sons of Northern Darkness for me, and then everything that's come after that has been like this sort of disjointed, like kind of schedule and different changes and whatnot. So
I mean, so that's 09. So okay, there was quite a lot of drama in between All Shall Fall and Northern Chaos Gods, wasn't there?
Just a bit, yeah.
So we had Abbott obviously doing his solo Abbott band, but what happened? He got forced out of Immortal because of his alcoholism or whatever.
Was that the original reason?
Was that the original reason, or?
It could well have been, actually. Yeah, I think you could be right.
I think it was. Yeah, he was starting to fall apart at the edges a bit, and maybe and that kind of led to the band going on hiatus again, perhaps. if I'm
Yeah.
correct. And then obviously, you know, I don't want to speculate on his personal issues, but perhaps that fed into, you know, what was to come later with the, you know,
To
the
get
dispute,
worse.
the dispute. Yeah. And, you know, it's not unrealistic to imagine a spiral downwards that then becomes a nasty about, you know, who owns what and all that sort of thing. You know, could be completely wrong, but
yeah, I mean, and what got interesting about this period was that so you had the issue with, say, Demonaz and Abbott, or Hogg, Demonaz and Abbott, and they split. He goes on to do his solo band, and you know he's doing fine for the most part from what you see. He's, you know, the band's doing well. Hogg and Demonaz start having issues, and then was it Hogg? No, Demonaz wanted the soul, which to me is completely fine. Like, why would Hogg have?
Well, I read
I read a little bit about this yesterday or the day before, and it turns, so from what I can gather, there was the original parting of Abbott from the other two, Hogg and Demonaz, and the dispute over that. And from what I can tell, Demonaz somehow managed, or Demonaz and Hogg managed to get the rights to the name, however so, you know. But then I think what happened, it turned out that Demonaz only registered the name in his own. He kind of cut Hogg out of it unknowingly until it got to a point where he discovered he'd been cut out of it. And then another, you know, second kind of legal course of actions happened after that. So I think, yeah, from what I can tell, Abbott's had a go at trying to get the name, hasn't succeeded, has gone on with his own stuff, like you said, and, you know, got on with his own band and had, you know, what's he up to, 3 releases or something like that, and seems to have toured quite a lot in that time, you know, with that band. And yeah, from what I can gather, you know, I think Demonaz has wanted that for his own from the get-go. Yeah.
I probably sort of jumped the gun a bit there, because the Hogg Demonaz fiasco sort of happened after 2018's Northern Chaos Gods album.
You're right. Yeah, I think it only happened in the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. There's been an album where they did record that together.
Yeah. So he was on that. And that was released July 6, 2018. I totally remember it coming out and being, you know, I wouldn't say I was waiting anxiously for it, but I was actually keen to.
There's a curiosity there.
And
yeah,
I'll leave you to it. What was your thoughts when it first
yeah, well,
out?
They released the single Northern Chaos Gods. I remember that came out. I was like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting it. I thought, I don't know what I was expecting, but I didn't expect it to be the return to that kind of Battles in the North sort of Blizzard Beast sort of level of speed, and it was, yeah, like, yeah, I actually bought the album based on that song. I thought, I'm going to give this a go, even though I'd sworn to myself I would not support a band without Abbott in it.
Straight in there buying it.
I was kind of, that song was enough to sort of get me over the line. I think at that point in time, you know, the only record, you know, only place I can buy CDs in my area was, you know, it was pretty much the only metal thing in there worth buying. I didn't want to leave it on the shelf for someone else to buy. So bought it home, and, you know, look, I had to sort of eat a bit of humble pie, because I was fully ready just to write it off big time. You know, like I wasn't keen on the idea of it being Immortal without Abbott at all. And I found myself liking it to some extent, like actually quite liking it. But the more I listened to it, the more I realized I only liked it because I felt like it was rehashing some, you know, old feelings of Immortal in the early days. Not because it was anything new, not because it was anything I hadn't heard before, or a better version of Immortal at all. It was just it created a feeling of nostalgia, but that's where it left me. Like nothing else. Like it wasn't. Yeah, it didn't really touch me beyond that after a while. Whereas their classic albums remain classic. You might not listen to them for years in between, but they remain classic. That to me felt empty.
They're part of your DNA. Those classic
albums. It was yeah, that's right. And it was sort of like, yeah, it had, you could listen to it and go, yeah, that sounds like Immortal, but it sounded like Demonaz's Immortal, which I guess it was always going to. And it really relied heavily on references to old songs and lyrics and all that sort of stuff. It was almost like if you got the lyric sheets for every Immortal song, threw them into a bin and chopped it all up, and then just pulled the words out and reordered them.
I'm looking at it right now. We got Mighty Raven Dark. Well, they've already used that, haven't they? In sort of.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep. Cold to Ice, Grim and Dark. I honestly, apart from Northern Chaos Gods and actually Mighty Raven Dark, I can't really recall any of the other songs. They blend into each other.
Likewise. Yep, likewise. And there's some catchy bits in it. There's some he uses that clean guitar tone relatively effectively. And,
you can tell that's a link to the past, which is good because like in the Battles era, and that sort of clean guitar sound is iconic, and that's brought back to full effect. But I think my issue with him in his songwriting when it was on the Demonaz album and also with the last two Immortal albums, his riff choices are very predictable in the just really stock normal chords.
Yeah, the word predictable
is exactly the right word to use, I think. There's a blueprint, and it doesn't deviate really too far from that within the Immortal. I guess his vision of Immortal that doesn't really venture outside those boundaries. And look, there's certain bands that you don't want them to change. Yeah, you don't want them to go outside those boundaries too much, at least. Maybe an album here or there, you can, step a little bit outside those boundaries. But for the most part, there are certain bands, like if Motorhead had changed their formula drastically from a winning formula, too much, they would have not been the same band. And there's bands like that, like I guess Slayer's probably another example. You don't want them venturing too far off track. Immortal, the thing with Immortal though is they did it slowly, and that's why it was so effective. By the time they got to At the Heart of Winter and then Damned in Black and Sons of Northern Darkness, they'd refined this sound and perfected it almost.
And it was all off the back of...
And everything since then to me just sounds like, consistency and hard work and, stability in a lineup as well for, a good chunk of time. So for me, it's not that it's bad, just that it's not adding anything to their legacy that hasn't already been done. There's nothing worse than seeing a band churning out albums that sure they sound like them and they're palatable and they're decent enough, but they're not adding anything significant to the band's legacy.
It's phoning it in to me. That's what it is. And because they know it's going to sell. Yeah, especially this one was going to sell because people were very curious.
That's right. And look,
it's not bad. It's just more. It's just there, and it's Immortal deserves better than that.
That's right. Yeah. It's a step. It's a step down from All Shall Fall.
I think it's quite a big step. I prefer this over the next one.
Yeah. Likewise.
I'm not a huge fan of the new one, but we'll get to that now.
Yeah.
But overall, off this one, opening track, Northern Chaos Gods, and I actually think the last track's really good for that epic.
Yeah. And it still benefits
From Hawk's drumming being there as well. I think that, there's still some connection to who they were in the past by the fact that he's still there on the sticks. Yeah, which disappears.
Yeah, I think the glaringly obvious factor for me is that Abbott is a way superior songwriter.
Yeah.
And he took Immortal to a level that they were at, and Demonaz just isn't at that level.
I think Demonaz's strong points are his riffs do create a certain atmosphere on those early albums.
Yeah.
And that's kind of still there on Northern Chaos Gods, like some of that, his signature's still on it. But without the other half of what made that combination what it was, it's only getting half the picture, which is why it just feels like a pale version of some of their better albums from earlier on.
Yeah, it's a hard one, because it's not. There are some bands who put out absolute rubbish, and this isn't rubbish, but it's just
not at all.
It's worse because it doesn't evoke anything.
You want to feel. Sometimes it's almost better to feel hate towards something than to feel nothing.
Yeah, I feel nothing.
But look, I gave it plenty of spins. It's not like the sort of album that I put on once and went, I don't like it. I'll never listen to that again. Like I did listen to it a fair bit when I first got it, but I don't know how often it's going to feature in my, in the future, in terms of when I want to listen to Immortal, how often I'll be pulling that album out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably come back to them in a year or two and be like, oh, it's pretty good, but if I'm listening to Immortal, it's everything up until Sons of Northern Darkness for me.
Yeah.
All right, we got what sort of kicked off the idea of doing this chat was knowing that the new album was coming out, and we thought we'd tie it in with doing the discography leading into the latest album, which is War Against All. Not a huge fan of the last few album titles. All Shall Fall, War Against All, Northern Chaos Gods.
Yeah. I can live with Northern Chaos Gods, but I get what you mean. Yeah, not super creative.
No. So this one, obviously Hog's out of the picture. We got some lineup. So it just says Demonaz on. Who's the guest guy? We got Icedale doing bass and additional guitars, and Kevin Kavala.
Kevin.
Oh, Kev.
Good on you, Kev. Good on you, Kev. Kev's hitting the skins.
Yeah. Kev the skin basher. The necro pounder.
Necro Kev.
So coming off the back of the previous album, when I heard this was coming out, I was like, oh, okay. Again, I wasn't overly excited. I just thought, of course I'm going to give it a crack and hopefully that's really good. But man, this one hasn't really hit me very well. I do like War God. I actually like that song, and that's probably but that again, that's harkening back to
it's basically like Tyrants.
It's good, but actually the middle part's really good. But I mean, War Against All sort of starts off similar to how the previous album did with Northern Chaos Gods. It's just
it's almost a cut and copy.
Yeah, and it's a good song, but Thunders of Darkness, I wasn't big onto that. And
the song I like the most on that is
Return to Cold. I think, and I'll be fair, I've only really listened to the album twice all the way through. So, but by this stage, with at least Northern Chaos Gods, I'd probably devoured it 5 or 6, 7 times by now and was starting to connect with it a little bit. This one, I didn't like it as much the second time as I did the first time. So that's
That's saying something. Yeah.
that's saying something. Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought the production on this one is quite, it doesn't suit. Like
yeah.
there's something a bit, I don't know, it's a bit too plasticky or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Thin.
Not much weight to the guitars. The guitars are pretty weak on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a weird production. Yeah. It's weird. Like, you know, put it next to Blizzard Beast in terms of weirdness for production for me. Like it's sort of, yeah, it feels modern, but it's trying to sound old, if that makes sense. So it's like going into a studio and going, I want to sound like it's 1994 or 1995, but can you do it using modern equipment? That's the feeling I get from it.
Like I felt the guitar sound on Northern Chaos Gods had a bit of grit to it. Like there was actually a bit of grit, and it sort of reminded me a bit of like Blizzard Beast and stuff.
Yeah.
This one is very clean.
Yeah.
And you know, losing Hog, you know, the drums. It's not a bad drum performance, but it's just
no. He's a hired gun. He's a hired gun.
Yeah.
How much soul can he have for the band? You know, maybe he's a lifelong fan. Who knows? But it's a bit different.
I think, yeah. Again, he's getting bogged down with pretty. Some great. You know, he's got his song called Immortal. Return to Cold.
How did he come up with him? No sun?
What's no sun?
Well, there's just no sun. Like it's a cloudy day, or the sun. Is he referring to the sun no longer exists, or it's just a cloudy day in Bergen? The day he wrote that one.
So no sun could just be the sun no longer rises part 2.
Yeah, it could be
just...
an abbreviated version of the track.
What do you think of the instrumental Nordlander?
Nordlander, yeah. I actually didn't mind the concept behind that. Like, I actually don't mind that song too much, but there's like a lead guitar bit on it that I listened to today, and it really irritated me. Like it was just, it didn't need to be there. Like, just forget about trying to have. And I forgot that Arva Isdal was involved in that album. If you're going to throw a solo, I mean, throw it to that bloke. Like, don't try and bust out a Demonaz solo.
No,
you know, 25 years after, you know.
Especially when you got a clean clinical production where it's going to show up every little fault.
Yeah.
Bury your shitty solo underneath a Battles in the North production.
But the idea of Immortal and an instrumental, it actually surprises me they haven't done that on prior albums. Like that could have fit really well into you know, At the Heart of Winter or Sons of Northern Darkness to have a really good instrumental track on there.
Yeah.
Good. The sentiment's cool with the idea behind that, but the execution, yeah, it could have been, just leave that fucking lead bit out, that attempted solo out. I would have actually quite liked that song. But apart from that, like there's a lot of, at this point in time, like I said, to be fair, I haven't given it heaps and heaps of time, but there's plenty of unmemorable stuff there too.
Yeah, I think.
But I did like I didn't mind Return to Cold. I thought that was a decent enough track.
Yeah, for me, it's the opening track, and War God's my favorite. I did enjoy that, particularly the middle part. But I don't know when I'll ever go back to this.
I'm not rushing back
to it. That's for sure.
No,
but
so verdict. It's probably my least favorite.
I'd have to agree.
Yeah.
I think we're on the same page with most of this stuff. I just fear what this whole era of the Demonaz controlled part of Immortal means when we look back in 10, 15 years' time of the band. And I don't know. who knows what the future holds? Maybe there'll be a reunion of sorts, and Abbott will come back into the fold, and there
And they
might
won't
be,
play any of this material.
and then it'll have been even more pointless.
Will this be the Blaze era of Maiden?
Exactly,
Like,
exactly
you know?
right. Yeah, like the forgotten years almost. But
Yeah.
but it's been a long span of time too. Like, you know, between, let's even say, all shall fall and now, you know, we're getting close to, what was that,
15 years.
2009? Yeah, we're getting close to 15 years. It's, you'd think if that was going to happen, and they were going to have a lot of good years in front of them, it'd have to happen pretty soon, and it'd have to. I just can't see it.
No, and I can't see it with Demon as having sole ownership of the trademark, because
Yeah,
for Abbott to enter, he'd be like an original member, but entering as a hired gun, really.
That's right. Yeah.
Into his own band, you know. I just
right.
can't imagine that happening, and I
No.
can't see Demon as giving up the power.
It's not deserving for
has
Abbott
to walk back into a situation like that either, you know, like, not at all.
He's doing all right with his own stuff, so
Yeah, it seems that way. Look, we haven't really talked too much about his solo stuff. I can take or leave. I didn't mind the first solo release he put out. Haven't really given the last two much my time. But, you know, he's a likable character, at least from our side of the fence. Like, he, you know, so I wish him well, and I hope he, you know, like that. I hope he's enjoying doing what he's doing. But, you know, it's in one way it's sad the way that things have happened for the band. You know, like that it comes down to that shitty kind of legal battle stuff, and it happens with the best. It's, you know, think of bands like Pink Floyd and some of the biggest bands in the world. It happens to the best of them, where the money becomes and the name becomes, you know, more important than the legacy and the art itself.
Yeah.
But you know, as a fan of the band, you want to preserve the specialness of certain bands, and Immortal. Yeah, I don't know. My opinions might change in the future, but it's for me, the classic era of the band. I think that, you know, when they decided to go on that hiatus after Sons of Northern Darkness, that should have been it.
Yeah, and what they probably
should have done, and I would have been happy.
Come back with a tour, maybe, but I almost feel like they toured, felt the pressure to put out an album, and like you mentioned earlier about rushing All Shall Fall, and it felt like a bit rushed. Maybe, you know, it wasn't, their heart wasn't in the right place for it. You know, it was just, we're touring, we've got to have something to tour for. You know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's a hard one. You know, like you compare it to a band like Emperor. You know, the pressure on them over the years to reform as a recording unit is, you know, you can imagine it's been huge. Like, so many people have wanted that, but that's, to their credit, they haven't really tarnished their legacy in any particular way. Like, say what you want about Prometheus, I didn't love it. I thought it's easily their worst album, but they called it after that, and Nissan went and did what he needed to do after that, and that's cool. Like, he's at least honored the name of Emperor enough to not try and continue it on in a modern form in the now.
I feel they care about the legacy.
They care about that. I feel like Demonaz continuing with these albums is sort of, not necessarily honoring it in the way that it should have. I mean, I know he didn't get to perform on anything after Blizzard Beast, but he was heavily involved in the band. Like, it was still his legacy, you know. So yeah, as a big fan of the band, it's kind of, I really want to restrain myself from being too, like you said right at the start, being too negative about the modern era of Immortal, but that's just my feelings towards it, you know.
I actually think me and you are probably in the minority as well, because I've heard nothing but pretty good responses to the last couple. That, you know, people seem to be quite happy with it. Whether that's just newer fans, like younger people who.
That's right, yeah, and that's
completely understandable. Maybe there is a whole new, maybe there is a whole new world of new Immortal fans out there, and they don't give a fuck about the way we feel about the band.
Yeah.
and people our age feel about the band. And if that's the case, well, good luck. All the more power to Demonaz. Maybe he's tapping into something that you and I aren't aware of.
Tapping in the no sun.
No, he's not tapping into the sun though. That's for sure. But I'll still love the band. You could say that about. I've never been a Metallica fan, but I'm sure Metallica fans feel this way every day as well.
Oh, mate, Metallica to me, like because they're such a big part of my early life, but they're that band I always check out, and I always try and find something to grasp to like.
Yeah,
and I try really hard to like it, even if I don't really like it. I'm like trying to make
you want
excuses to like it.
Yeah.
And after a while, you're just like, what are you doing?
Let it go.
It is what it is. If it's not good, it's not good.
Yeah.
And look, I think these are by no means bad albums, but they're just not, for me, they're not up to the standard of the previous stuff. So
and look,
there have been instances where certain bands have had a classic era, had many years in the wilderness, come back and then just released a fucking ball terror of an album out of nowhere that no one expected. And let's hope that maybe Immortal does that one day, but I just can't see it happening without it being the original pairing of Demonaz and Abbott. Without Abbott there, it can't. That's not possible for me.
No, it's lost the atmosphere in the music for me a lot.
Yeah. Well, I just think it lost. It's lost, like more than half of its soul. Like to me, Abbott was always the soul of the band. The soul of the band.
Yeah,
you could create many bands that could be Immortal cover bands and play their music to perfection, but you'll never have the energy of an Abbott in a band.
No, he's just a charismatic frontman who, and getting to the vocals of the last two, I mean, it sort of ties in with the music as well. Is that the vocals are neither here nor there? They're there, but they're not really. It's not like they're passionate, but they don't really achieve much, do they? Like they don't.
Well, they're really
oh my god,
and they're only really mimicking
Cawthon.
Abbott's style. Or I feel like Abbott's phrasing of words throughout
pretty similar.
The early, like it's sort of a it's sort of like just copying something that's already been done as well. Like it's almost like, I don't know, maybe because they've spent so much time together working creatively, maybe it's just how it comes out for him, but it's almost like he's trying to sound like Abbott to me at times.
Yeah, I thought he's had a bit of a Cawthon / obviously he's using some Abbott isms.
Yeah.
But and that's him knowing the importance of Abbott in Immortal. That's his little nod to like, I know. Yeah, but he just won't.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, there's definitely Cawthon there in those vocals as well.
Yeah.
So who knows, mate? We'll just wait and see what becomes of the Immortal name, I suppose.
All right, so we've reached the end of this epic and grim frostbitten journey.
We have indeed.
I thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me again.
No worries.
And I think there's only one word left to say at this point.
Way.
Way.